You're the captain of a cargo ship, navigating the vast Pacific Ocean on a calm night. The radar shows a direct, fast route to your destination, until you notice something strange. An entire section of the ocean, a perfect straight line, completely devoid of ships. It's the fastest route, but no captain dares take it. Why? What is it about this enormous, mysterious part of the ocean that ships refuse to pass through? The Pacific is massive, so vast that certain areas are over 1,600 miles from any land. If a ship breaks down here, it's completely on its own, cut off from help. But that's just one of the reasons captains avoid these stretches of water. In some areas, the danger isn't just due to distance. One of the biggest problems? Wind. By itself, wind can present a significant hurdle to ships. After all, ships are not made to be particularly aerodynamic when it comes to traversing through water. And while ship sails were rendered obsolete with the development of the steam and later electric engines, wind can still dampen the sails of a ship that's trying to go against it. There's even a precise formula to determine a ship's windage area, or what part of the ship is being pushed by the wind at any given time. The windage area on the sides of the ship is much higher than the front and the back. After all, ships are known to be extremely long and relatively lean. But going a bit further, cruise ships often have a higher windage area than tankers or container ships. This is due to their overall higher and broader infrastructure that also minimizes water displacement, which effectively reduces how deep the ship is in the water. Furthermore, larger water displacement means that the ship picks up more inertia as it travels, which amplifies the benefits of cargo versus passenger ships in open waters. As for how that translates to cross-oceanic travels, it's best to look at the wind maps that cover the ocean. Typically, ships will travel along with the wind or directly against it. Otherwise, they'll go through areas that experience the least wind speeds and accompanying pressure. The average trade wind speed on the ocean is about 15 miles an hour, and since there's no surface to allow for cloud gathering, the Pacific typically lacks significant cloud coverage and resulting pressure changes to make wind. However, the Pacific does experience seasonal typhoons, which can pick up wind speeds of between 75 and 100 miles an hour. If you overlap the shipping map with the wind map, you can typically tell where there are storms brewing in the area by the exact absence of ships. The indirect problem that stems partially from wind but also from oceanic currents as a whole is waves. The waves caused by wind are somewhat unoriginally called wind waves, and there's an entire science devoted to determining exactly how wind can create them. To keep things relatively simple, if the wind presses on the ocean surface in a uniform way, that is, doesn't change direction, across enough distance, it will displace enough water for a wave to pick up speed and inertia. However, since precisely detecting exact wind speeds over a huge area of open ocean is impractical, there's an entire range of waves that are considered most likely to happen for any general wind speed and direction. Let's consider that the wind speed picks up from the standard trade wind and goes up to 33 miles an hour. According to statistics, a wind of that speed over a stretch of some 340 miles can generate significantly varied waves that ships have to contend with. The average wave height in this instance is 11 feet, but 10% of all waves encountered will be over 18 feet, and there's a 5% chance that 1 in every 200 waves will be over 35 feet tall. Of course, the average cargo ship height above the waterline is some 115 feet, so a wave is highly unlikely to spill into a decent-sized cargo ship. However, all that kinetic energy created by the wave has to go somewhere, and that somewhere is the ship's hull. Additionally, if the wind and waves go against the existing water currents, the waves get amplified, leading to the so-called significant wave height, or SWH. Such amplifications can cause rogue waves, which have been reported to grow over 100 feet tall and cause significant damage to a ship. Reports of SWH and rogue waves are sparse, and they are more common in the Atlantic rather than the Pacific. But real-time maps of wind speeds, oceanic currents, and traffic routes are are important to signal whether there's an increased risk of SWH formations and the resulting rogue waves. Among the surveyed regions, there's one that's particularly dangerous to ships. Called the North Pacific or Hawaiian High, it's a semi-permanent anticyclone that disperses air currents outwards, creating areas of higher wind speeds. This is why there's an area northeast of Hawaii that sees relatively little ship traffic, despite it being technically shorter than going closer to the Alaskan coast. Apart from being semi-permanent, the anticyclone shifts slightly with the season, creating ever-changing shipping lanes through the area to minimize the risk of ships encountering heavy winds and waves. Worse yet, the wind and waves over the ocean seem to be slowly speeding up. The highest waves have grown by nearly a foot over the course of the past 30 years. The most likely cause? Global warming. Since we haven't really solved that one, chances are it's only going to get worse, but it's not insurmountable just yet. But if the ships are already considerably tall enough to withstand waves, why is there such fear over them in the first place? Well, it's because modern cargo ships are packing nearly everything in storage containers. And storage containers are much more susceptible to being jostled around and even being tossed out of the ship. During the winter season of 2021 alone, there were reports of a total of 3,000 shipping containers being lost at sea. While a smaller number has been lost to explosions, possibly due to improperly secured cargo, a majority simply fell into the ocean itself, typically never to be seen again. This is not a particularly significant number compared to what the shipping industry handles on a regular basis, but the potential losses for some companies can be ludicrous. Another issue: the Pacific is huge. It covers more than 30% of the world's surface by itself, and its basin is larger than all the continents combined. Simply put, there are so many different options to pick from when designing a shipping route that ships could probably keep hundreds of miles between them at any time. But that distance comes at a cost. Just because it's possible to put hundreds or even thousands of miles between the ship and the nearest human settlement, or even a piece of coast, that doesn't mean it's practical. Consider, as a simple example, Point Nemo, which is in the southern part of the Pacific Ocean. It is roughly 1,600 miles away from any land, and the closest points to it are two tiny islands in the Pacific and Antarctic. If a ship gets stranded there and nearby ships don't have the means to provide assistance, help from the coast is going to be extremely far away. The northern part of the Pacific is a slightly better situation. After all, there's a good chunk of the continental US, Alaska, Canada, Hawaii, and Russia outlining it. If something happens to a ship in the open ocean, help is on its way much quicker. But that's precisely why most shipping companies stick to well-used shipping lanes that typically stray relatively close to major islands and shipping ports. Since the Pacific is vast and already well protected geopolitically, there's little danger in ships remaining relatively close to each other. We say relatively, but the maps you see on websites are grossly misleading. What may seem like overlapping travel paths are in reality ships that are miles away from each other. The advanced communication systems they carry on board allow them to easily course correct way before spotting a ship on the horizon. While there have been certainly reports of ships ramming into each other, such as the collision between Chinese and Filipino ships at the end of August of 2024, those typically come as a result of geopolitical conflict and involve smaller fishing or patrol vessels. The biggest reason, though? Maps lie. The most commonly used map type in the world is called the Mercator projector. It's just one of several ways to depict a sphere onto a 2D surface, this time a rectangle. One of the main benefits of using the Mercator over any other projection type is precisely for navigation. With the Mercator projection, objects and distances farther away from the equator get increasingly distorted. This can cause significant discrepancies between landmass sizes. For example, depicting Greenland having the same size as Africa. However, what it doesn't change is the direction ships have to take when using traditional compass navigation. Using a compass, a ship can choose a single bearing to describe its destination, and so long as it doesn't deviate from its course, it will arrive at its destination eventually. For smaller distances, the difference between straight line and Mercator compass lengths is negligible. For cross-Pacific lanes, it can result in deviations that run for hundreds or even thousands of miles. This creates two polarizing effects on oceanic navigation. First, the straight line between 2 points so far across the Pacific may not be the shortest distance the ships have to travel. Cargo ships that can afford to make occasional course corrections can stick to the actual shortest route, which for 2 points on the same latitude would curve up above the equator and curve down below it. On the other hand, using the straight path, as on the map, can make travel relatively easier, especially when dealing with the additional perils of being buffeted by wind and waves. In truth, the actual shipping lanes fall somewhere in the middle, using the advantage of the Mercator projection to keep navigation simpler, while trying to minimize the distance and the resulting travel time. At least the ships passing only from one side of the Pacific to the other don't have to deal with the mess that is the Strait of Malacca. Ultimately, the length of the route a ship takes is affected by both natural and economic factors. If a shipping lane has favorable winds and doesn't deviate much from the shortest route, it can be a perfect combination. After all, it's a give-and-take relationship between how much fuel a ship needs to burn through to get to its destination and how long the travel will take. This can lead to interesting situations where the shorter route would be more dangerous or go against the wind to slow the ship down. At the same time, a longer route can minimize the risk of larger waves and damage to both the ship and its precious cargo or passengers. We hope you learned a bit about the complexities of shipping across the ocean. What topic would you like us to cover next? Leave your thoughts in the comments section below, and as always, thank you for watching. The Bermuda Triangle. While you might think of it as a perfectly triangular zone between Puerto Rico, Florida, and Bermuda, the so-called Devil's Triangle is anything but clearly defined. For decades, this stretch of almost 500,000 square miles of ocean has been credited with some of modern history's greatest mysteries. What is to blame for these disappearances? Did a buildup of methane bubbles cause a 540-foot boat to explode? Or was it something more sinister and more alive, reaching up from the water? Did a cyclone bring down a fleet of Navy bombers, or could a wormhole be to blame? Theories range from practical to extraterrestrial, and though scientists have a new theory that debunks suggestions about aliens or the lost city of Atlantis, all the details that we don't know makes it tempting to see some truth in how those theories came to be. We know what has gone missing, and for the most part, when. The where, why, and how, though, have remained unanswered as more and more vessels head off in the direction of a blue horizon and never return. The secrets held in the triangle's choppy waters and unruly skies have eluded scientists for years. Many of the wrecks and ships lost at sea have yet to be recovered, which isn't surprising given the truly staggering depths the seafloor there reaches. Take the Puerto Rico Trench at the triangle's southernmost point, for example. At 8,400 meters below sea level into the Earth's crust, there aren't even that many vessels capable of descending down and exploring the vast unknown darkness. As technology speeds up, though, we have begun to get a clearer picture of the undersea universe of the Bermuda Triangle. Stories of adventure and exploration always have and always will capture the human imagination. We anticipate stories to have logical endings, but when the facts don't line up, our minds will wander into fantastical places. So by the time 50 ships and 20 airplanes mysteriously disappeared within its boundaries, the myth of the Bermuda Triangle found a life of its own where so many had lost theirs. Today, the myths have been debunked by one outstanding theory, but with countless vessels and explorers still lost at sea, perhaps there's a chance that uncovering more evidence will show that the Bermuda Triangle holds more secrets than we ever could have imagined. So, let's dig into some of the most fascinating stories of disappearing vessels, but first we need to define the location and existence of the triangle. It's not as clear-cut as you might think. We know there's no concrete landmarks that resolutely define the Bermuda Triangle. Roughly located between Miami, Puerto Rico, and Bermuda, the waters of the triangle attracts tourists, shipping vessels, and people ferrying to and from locations. The first mention of the Bermuda Triangle was in a 1964 edition of Argosy magazine, a cult science fiction magazine known for its stories about wild adventures and musings about extraterrestrial beings. Vincent H. Gaddis begins his article, The Deadly Bermuda Triangle, with a fateful question that would go on to define the region for decades to come. What is there about this particular slice of the world that has destroyed hundreds of ships and planes without a trace? This was the first time someone had linked the seemingly unrelated accidents and credited it to something mysterious. While myths had circulated around the disappearances and unrecovered vessels, the thought that dozens of manned crafts vanished without a trace in the same region was immediately unsettling. From that point on, any tragedy or questionable weather activity was attributed to the mysterious forces at work within the Bermuda Triangle. But the rise of the myth of the Bermuda Triangle coincides with a few key inventions that made it possible to disseminate theories. A big contribution to interest in the Atlantic coincided with advances in image capturing technology in the 1950s. The first image of Earth was taken from a satellite in 1959. It doesn't have the same level of detail we might be used to today, and it verges on a little abstract, but the capability to capture images of the Earth from space ushered in a new era of sea exploration. With better image capturing technology from space, humans' bird's-eye view of the sea helped to paint a clearer picture of previously unexplored areas. Additionally, meteorologists had access to evidence of storm systems and weather patterns in ways they couldn't have imagined previously. These discoveries have changed and challenged the theories put forth about the Bermuda Triangle. But before we can attempt to debunk any mysteries, we need to understand the context surrounding these theories. Television sets had been introduced to the public in the 1930s, but it took until the late 40s for them to become commonplace in some nations. While radio transmissions had long enabled hosts and commentators to craft stories using colorful language and intonation, with the advent of TV, news took on a visual element that let viewers get what felt like a first-hand look at the scene where something happened. Events that took place on the other side of the world could be seen in your living room, making it easier to imagine parts of the world they'd never been to. But when something happened and there were no images, no videos, no recordings to latch onto, many people felt the need to invent an explanation to boats and planes that had gone missing. Vincent Gaddis's article wasn't the first time someone looked out to the Sargasso Sea and imagined something powerful at work. But his writing sparked a whirlwind of interest in the cases of the lost planes and ghost ships he mentions. Interestingly, however, he offered no theory as to what might have been to blame for the activity in the triangle, but by giving it a name and tapping into humans' innate curiosity to understand the how, when, and where of the stories we hear, Gaddis opened the floodgates for pop culture to capitalize on the mystery of the sea. The theories that followed would instill fear in many, but seemed to captivate just about anyone who encountered them. So let's examine several of these mysteries up close. Boats have been navigating the waters between Bermuda, Florida, and Puerto Rico for centuries, if not millennia. It's estimated that the people known as the Lucayans used boats to island hop in the Bahamian archipelago starting 1,000 years ago. That being said, there's no way to say how many boats have sunk in the Atlantic since humans have begun navigating its waters. It's not in any way a modern phenomenon, but using Gaddis's account of the Bermuda Triangle's mystery to guide our inquiry, the disappearances on the water saw an uptick starting in the late 1800s. Let's start with the HMS Atalanta, a 26-gun naval frigate. The vessel had seen action in the Keeling Islands out in the Indian Ocean before making its way towards the Bermuda Triangle. Originally named the HMS Juno, the Atalanta had come to the area to serve as a training vessel. In 1879, the Atalanta set out with a crew of 280 on her docks. Records show that as a part of the vessel's third training expedition, it stopped off in Bermuda. An outbreak of yellow fever had spread among the crew, so the ship's captain, Francis Sterling, kept his crew on a tight schedule and soon set sail to return to Portsmouth, a destination they would never reach. They left Bermuda in late January with plans to arrive home in April. After a mysterious event at sea, all 280 were presumed lost and declared dead in June of 1880. A boat of that size disappearing without a trace is also unimaginable. Theories arose about rogue waves hundreds of feet tall. Thoughts of Jules Verne's Kraken came to mind. As science fiction had come to dominate the literary world at the time, a real-life tragedy involving hundreds of lost lives made the fantastical seem eerily possible. While the rumors might have ended there and faded into a disappointing conclusion that the men were lost at sea, more and more incidents popped up shortly thereafter and made that simple but unsatisfying conclusion harder to get behind. But the next story is sure to send chills up your spine. Just a year later, in 1881, perhaps the most mysterious encounter ever recorded in the Triangle took place. A 210-foot schooner, the Ellen Austin, set out on its regular route from Liverpool to New York City. Several weeks of sailing underway, Captain Griffin of the Ellen Austin redirected his course and found himself in the choppy waters of the Sargasso Sea. Quite a ways off course. The detour brought his crew into the sightline of another boat that seemed to be navigating without agenda. Out of curiosity, the Ellen Austin approached the ship only to discover the ship had been entirely abandoned, though its cargo and crew's quarters were untouched. Captain Griffin ordered some of his men to board the mystery boat so the two boats could carry on the rest of the journey in tandem. Once the boat was back in New York, its cargo could be unloaded and perhaps they could get to explore it for evidence of what happened to its crew. While the two ships got underway, a freak storm separated them. Not an uncommon occurrence with boats of that size in rough seas. When the clouds calmed, Captain Griffin spied the other boat and approached. Yet again, he found the boat abandoned. This time, it was his crew members who had gone missing without a trace. Out of fear that manning the ship once more might be a death sentence for his crew, Captain Griffin abandoned the ship and made a beeline for New York, leaving the boat that seemingly devoured humans fading into the horizon. But even a human-devouring boat pales in comparison to what has come to be known as the single largest loss of life in the US Navy's history, not involving combat, even to this day. Let's fast forward about 30 years to 1918. World War I is raging on in Europe, and Caribbean nations are reeling from the Spanish flu, which caused over 100,000 deaths. Race riots were breaking out all over the United States while women were on the cusp of winning the right to vote. Essentially, headlines worldwide were saturated with news of historical events beyond comparison. But when 306 crew and passengers disappeared from the USS Cyclops, it was a big moment. With Lieutenant Commander G.W. Worley at the helm, this 550-foot-long boat disappeared without a trace. The vessel had played a role in World War I, transporting coal to ships all over the world. In March of 1918, the USS Cyclops was loaded with 11,000 tons of manganese ore to take from Rio de Janeiro to the United States. The vessel did make an unplanned stop on Barbados, her last known location. With 1,800 nautical miles to their destination, the USS Cyclops set out, but wasn't seen or heard from ever again. The last message from the crew read, "Weather fair, all well." Not even an SOS message from the seasoned crew of Navy sailors was sent. The USS Cyclops, perhaps in part due to its mythological name, sparked theories about the lost city of Atlantis. Writer Charles Berlitz initially proposed that Atlantis had been swallowed up in the Bermuda Triangle and the lost city had become a hub for paranormal activity. Maybe ghostly souls lost to the deep sought company. Or perhaps the USS Cyclops crashed into an underwater tower, its wreckage becoming a part of an undiscovered cityscape. Others questioned whether the manganese in the cargo might have exploded, or if a German U-boat lurked inconspicuously among the waves before sinking the collier ship. Perhaps it was a mutiny gone wrong that ended with everyone losing. Another theory that's a little more rooted in science pertains to methane bubbles. Undersea deposits of solid methane occasionally come to the surface in bubbles. When it's just one bubble, it does little damage, but some theorized about underwater eruptions, akin to a volcanic eruption. There is a lot of random chance about the position of a bubble to a ship's helm, but the thought of gas escaping from below being enough to sink a 500-foot ship makes you think twice about setting sail in the Bermuda Triangle. And, as we'll come to find out, those who fly planes have had experiences just as mysterious as their boating counterparts. But before we can look to the skies, we have one more boating phenomenon to explore: the ever-elusive ghost ships. Countless ships have ventured out into the Triangle's water and made it back to shore without fail. But the fact remains that there are many wrecks at the bottom of the ocean. There's a reason the area around Bermuda has even been called the shipwreck capital of the world. The most notable wrecks in Bermuda fell to their final resting site below the sea because of battles, crashes into reefs, and intentional ship scuttling to create reefs. But tragically, not every ship that goes missing is found, as the mysteries around the HMS Atalanta, Ellen Austin, and USS Cyclops show. Like the empty ship encountered by the Ellen Austin's crew, ghost ships are not all that uncommon in the Bermuda Triangle. While disappearances all presumably end with the same underwater fate for passengers and boat alike, ghost ships are recovered vessels with no trace of the crew that manned them. The mystery around them seems heightened in comparison to run-of-the-mill disappearances. Consequently, the theories attempting to explain what happened also seem to escalate, as you'll see in this next story. Jumping ahead just 3 years from when the USS Cyclops vanished, let's head to the waters east of North Carolina. The Carroll A. Deering was en route from Barbados to Norfolk, Virginia, headed north. A 5-masted schooner, the ship was manned by either 10 or 11 crew. On January 31, 1921, from the lighthouse on Cape Hatteras, the Coast Guard spotted the ship. To quote someone who saw it, like a flying Dutchman, the 5-masted schooner Carroll A. Deering loomed through the mists about Diamond Shoals today. All sails set, but unmanned. Truly a ghost ship flying across the waters. By the time the vessel reached the Diamond Shoals, an ever-changing topography of sandbars off the Outer Banks, the Carroll A. Deering was beyond repair. The Coast Guard ventured out onto the wreckage to find the ship entirely abandoned. According to reports, when they boarded, the sails were still set and food had been prepared, but left uneaten. There were no obvious signs of a struggle, attack, or even a mutiny. Just 2 days prior to the Deering's crash landing, the vessel had passed by the Cape Lookout lightship. As the two boats crossed paths, a crew member from the Deering had shouted out that they had lost both anchors, but otherwise all was well. So how did things escalate so quickly? Was the ship overtaken by pirates? Was there a mutiny? If so, why would they have abandoned a perfectly good, well-stocked ship? 3 months later, a man named Christopher Columbus Gray found a message in a bottle along the North Carolina shoreline. The message read, "Deering captured by oil-burning vessel, taking off everything and handcuffing the crew. Crew hiding all over ship, but no chance to escape." This major clue whipped up even more theories. The State Department launched an official investigation trying to find out if a band of pirates really were to blame. Questions then rose as to whether the crew's disappearance had a connection to politics at the time. Rumors grew about the possibility of Russian participation in the crew's disappearance. One newspaper reported a worldwide search going on for the Deering's crew. It theorized that the crew were thought to be Russian prisoners who had been kidnapped and escorted off the boat. But it turns out that the message in the bottle was a hoax. The man who had supposedly discovered it had written it. Eager to get someone from the Cape Hatteras lighthouse fired and take their job, Gray fabricated the only clue in the investigation. While the worldwide search fizzled out, strange new theories about alien abductions rose to the forefront, and the fervor surrounding missing ships made it all the way into one of the world's most famous director's movies. The disappearance that attracted the most theories about alien abductions was the disappearance of the Cotopaxi steamship. Steven Spielberg's 1977 sci-fi film Close Encounters of the Third Kind features the Cotopaxi. Spielberg has his characters come across the wreck of the Cotopaxi in a most unusual place, the Gobi Desert. This film built off of the theory that the Cotopaxi was swallowed up by the Bermuda Triangle, then sucked back up by aliens. Is it possible that the Cotopaxi really was abducted by aliens? Let's look into the nature of its disappearance. The SS Cotopaxi was a steamship loaded with a cargo of 3,800 tons of coal. Her route was from Charleston to Havana, and she had 32 crew members on board to guide her way. The Cotopaxi left on November 29, 1925, and was rumored to have encountered a tropical storm 2 days later. Then, she was never heard from again. According to the Associated Press, the crew reported the Cotopaxi had water in its hold and was listing badly. Before it vanished entirely, distress signals were sent out, but obviously no one was able to act in time. Most of the intrigue surrounding the Cotopaxi does not come about through its disappearance, but more so the multitude of theories that people came up with to explain 32 people's disappearances. Besides the extraterrestrial encounters that Spielberg illustrated in his film, people have claimed that the SS Cotopaxi became a ghost ship. In fact, a few online rumors circulated multiple websites in the 2010s that the Cotopaxi had been spotted, floating on the water. Supposedly, members of the Cuban Coast Guard spotted an unmanned vessel heading for the island and went to intercept it. 90 years after its disappearance, this news was astonishing. How had the steamship stayed afloat for so many years? And if it was that seaworthy, where was its crew? Perhaps the only thing more ominous than finding an entirely abandoned boat in the ocean is finding one with just one living being on board: a dog. And this is the exact circumstance of what happened when the Rubicon was found floating in the Bermuda Triangle. While boating technology today can make many parts of navigation user-friendly, and some sailboats today even have automated sails, in 1944, dogs could not man boats, and they still can't today either. As years of submarine warfare and naval battles came to an end, newspapers reported a ship found in the Gulf Stream without a crew. Found stranded 200 miles off the coast of Havana, the vessel was towed into Miami to be recovered. However, when a towboat arrived, they found someone on board. Per the Argus newspaper, only a dog was found aboard the Rubicon. The last entry in her logbook was made on September 26th when she was put into Havana. While there was an eyewitness to whatever transpired on the Rubicon's decks, no one could ask the lone survivor what happened to the Rubicon's crew. Was it another instance of alien intervention? Maybe the dog hid in just the right spot, or the extraterrestrials had their eyes on humans specifically. Had rough weather shaken the crew from their posts and into the sea? Perhaps part of the crew risked a mutiny, and a battle ensued, wiping out everyone. Or had something in the water of the Bermuda Triangle driven the humans to insanity? Scientists believe they have a logical answer to this phenomenon, as well as other disappearances, but first we'll need to look into the other notable topics surrounding the Bermuda Triangle: planes. The Bermuda Triangle does not have a vendetta against watercraft only. As air travel became increasingly popular for both military operations and recreational purposes, instances of planes disappearing into the Bermuda Triangle rose in tandem. Just over a year after the Rubicon was towed back to port, down a crew without explanation, one of the most notorious disappearances in the Bermuda Triangle took place. Known as Flight 19, a training mission on December 5, 1945, saw 5 TBM Avenger torpedo bombers fly east over the Atlantic for a routine flight and never returned. The squadron of U.S. Navy planes was scheduled to fly in their own triangular formation, going east from Naval Air Station Fort Lauderdale for 141 miles, then north for 73 miles, and finally back over a final 140-mile leg to complete the exercise. Flight 19's location was last given as 75 miles northeast of Cocoa, Florida. When they took off, each plane had enough fuel for 5.5 hours of flying. The flight was scheduled to take only 3 hours and 13 minutes. When they gave their location for the last time, each plane had just over an hour's worth of fuel left. Records indicate that at that time, weather over the Sargasso Sea grew worse and sea conditions amplified. The airport in Miami reported a large area of turbulent weather developing from a storm raging over Georgia. By the time night fell, the storm had moved to the Miami area, creating squalls over the sea and generating 40-mile-an-hour winds at 1,000 feet elevation. Supposedly, 75-mile-an-hour winds were flying up 8,000 feet. When they realized the planes were missing, the naval station dispatched a number of planes to search for the missing aircrafts. A PBM Mariner flying boat set out from the NAS Banana River, north of Fort Lauderdale, with 13 men on board. Adding salt to the wound of an already tragic day, this rescue plane also never returned to base. That day, a total of 27 men were lost either at sea or to the sky. Reviewing the radio calls between the airmen and the base that day, it seemed that the seasoned pilots had found themselves lost over the ocean. An overhead radio call reported discrepancies between compass readings from the crew and the route they were supposed to be following. Strong winds had pushed them off course, and the crew struggled to figure out where they were. Like navigation on the seas, air travel relied heavily on using compasses to determine the proper direction of travel and how to find a location based on proximity to landmarks. But a leading theory about the Bermuda Triangle's frequency of accidents has to do with its location along an agonic line, a longitudinal line where there is no need to compensate for magnetic compass variation. It is one of two places in the world where true north and magnetic north are perfectly aligned, and compass variation does not need to be taken into consideration. When traveling at the pace of a ship, you have a little bit of time to check and double-check your navigation calculations to compensate for this cartographical anomaly. But for pilots traveling over 200 miles an hour while actively steering, calculations must be quick and accurate to keep on track. The complications of the agonic line on compasses most certainly does contribute to accidents at sea. The magnetic field beneath the Bermuda Triangle has been credited with confusing pilots and sailors alike, but the geography of the area creates confusing visual markers as well. From the skies, the many islands off the coast of Florida, the Bahamas, and the Caribbean in general makes navigation confusing for people determining their position in proximity to clusters of land they spot, which possibly could have played a role in the next story. Another plane disappeared in 1954. Flight 441 was a US-owned super constellation, also known as an R-7V1. Known for its ability to cross the Atlantic in just over 8 hours, this carrier plane regularly made intercontinental trips. But when it flew on October 30th from the Patuxent Naval Air Station in Maryland to Lajes in the Azores, the 42 people on board, including naval officers and their families, simply vanished. Its takeoff was normal and communicating normally for the first 400 miles of its journey. Then it went silent. After a 5-day search, not a single piece of debris was recovered, and the search had to be suspended due to inclement weather. The aircraft had no structural issues, the weather at the time of day was fine, and the pilot, Lieutenant Leonard, had flown the route for 2 years. The plane had weather radar on it and could have been in contact in advance if something had been detected. The Navy's Aviation Board indicated that structural failure could have been a possibility, but the likelihood was very remote. With a cargo of life vests, exposure suits, and life rafts, if the plane had exploded, search crews would have spotted some of this debris. But not a scrap of metal or any other indication that the plane made contact with the water had been found. However, there are scientific theories that could explain the disappearance. Perhaps a freak weather accident like an air bomb could have been to blame. Scientists recently coined this term air bomb, coming out of hexagonally shaped clouds that generate over the Atlantic Ocean. These clouds can release blasts of air that hit the ocean at speeds of over 170 miles an hour. These could easily send a plane plunging into the ocean or generate a wave capable of sinking a ship. One of the most recent disappearances tied to the Bermuda Triangle happened in 2017, when 4 people on board an MU-2B plane vanished on a trip from Puerto Rico to Titusville, Florida. About 3 hours into the flight, ATC in Miami lost communication with the plane at a height of 24,000 feet, while it was moving at a speed of 345 miles an hour. No inclement weather was reported at the time. The MU-2B vanished from radar as well. The next day, a search ensued, and the Coast Guard searched 8,200 square miles of ocean. But this story has more of a resolution than others. Unlike many of the earlier disappearances, the MU-2B had debris recovered from its crash 15 miles east of the island of Eleuthera of the Bahamas. Given the improved search and rescue capabilities of today's Coast Guards with better satellite signals and data recording devices required within planes, technology has given us better insight into what happened with a plane that followed suit of the other planes that had disappeared in the Bermuda Triangle before it. Had the search mobilized a few hours later, there's a chance no debris would have been recovered, and the mystery of the MU-2B could have gone down in infamy as a part of the Bermuda Triangle's lore, instead of having the truth that it went down in the sea revealed. But as we've seen, future developments have changed the narrative, raising the question of whether or not we should fear the triangle today as much as we have in the past. But first, let's apply some modern discoveries to the past and see if there's a more straightforward explanation to some of the theories we've explored. Boats, planes, and hundreds of human beings have gone missing in the Bermuda Triangle. Theories about what went down have swirled in the aftermath of the disappearances. But we all know the expression, hindsight is 20/20. And with today's breakthroughs in tracking weather patterns, studying archaeological sites, and statistically predicting accidents, most of the theories around the Bermuda Triangle's famous accidents have been debunked. Let's run it back and look at what really might have happened in each of these tragic accidents. The Atalanta. For such a big ship and crew to go missing, people thought it must have been a big animal or a massive act of nature. A former crew member on the Atalanta who was spared from its ill-fated end on the bottom of the sea claimed that the HMS Atalanta was routinely loaded with too much cargo. He claimed to have seen the ship roll beyond 32 degrees in bad weather because of the heavy load. Throw an inexperienced crew on a training mission with low morale from rampant illness, and you have a recipe for human error and a sunken ship. The Ellen Austin's encounter. Did it really happen? The jury's out on whether or not this meeting with the mystery ship really happened. Lloyd's of London, an English insurance company, kept meticulous records of all ships posted as missing for the sake of settling insurance claims. Missing vessels books recorded the coming and goings of ships, and plenty of disappearances are recorded. The insurance company has commented on the case of the Ellen Austin and said that its journey went without incident, and no missing vessel of the description would have been in the area at the time. The USS Cyclops. Perhaps the most mysterious case, the absence of emergency communications does hint that something quick and debilitating happened to this ship. An officer who disembarked in Brazil from the Cyclops connected with the US Navy decades later to discuss the ship's problematic design and the issues amongst the crew at the time. He claimed that the ship's leader, Lieutenant Commander Worley, was unliked for his unwavering attitude yet overly cautious way of navigating. The officer pointed to the impressive weight of the cargo and noted the holds amidships were the only places that could hold that weight, but carrying a load as big as the Cyclops' final cargo haul meant placing some cargo in the fore and aft holds. Storing manganese there pressed on the Cyclops' structural weaknesses by placing stress on the hull. With the vessel's integrity compromised due to misstorage, it's likely that the USS Cyclops snapped into two pieces and rapidly sank. The Carroll A. Deering. According to Coast Guard Captain R.L. Gaskill, the four-mast schooner got caught up in 90-mile-an-hour winds reported at that time and found their vessel stranded on the outermost sandbar of Diamond Shoals. He suspected that the crew made a life-or-death decision to abandon their doomed vessel and risk their luck taking their lifeboats to shore. When the boat was found, none of its lifeboats were on board, supporting this theory. With a 9-mile journey to get to land, Gaskill doubts that they would have survived the journey in winds like that. In winds of that speed, waves can be very tall and capsize small vessels easily. It was a combination of being in the wrong place at the wrong time that doomed the crew of the Carroll A. Deering. The Cotopaxi. Rumors about the Cuban Coast Guard spotting the Cotopaxi were a part of a fake news trend, whereby news outlets would intentionally publish hoaxes to create intrigue and draw a big audience to their websites. And Steven Spielberg's inclusion of the Cotopaxi in Close Encounters of the Third Kind represents how creatives would build off fears, interests, and theories circulating in pop culture to create a sense of relevance in their work. While potentially disappointing to those who want to believe that aliens are at work in the Bermuda Triangle, the wreckage of the SS Cotopaxi has recently been identified in the waters off Florida. Just 35 miles off the coast of St. Augustine, the Cotopaxi sank in waters not even considered to be inside the Bermuda Triangle. Over the course of 15 years, marine biologists worked extensively, taking measurements and comparing blueprints to share their findings. Because of the many theories about what happened, the scientists wanted definitive proof that the wreck was the Cotopaxi before sharing the news. They cross-referenced their findings with a lawsuit filed by the relatives of the Cotopaxi's crew. The lawsuit mentions that a carpenter who had repaired hatch covers on the ship had encountered a few other vessels with a similar design that had structural flaws. He claimed that when water washed up on the deck, it would leak into the cargo hold and weigh down the ship. When you examine this design flaw in light of the tropical storm that the Cotopaxi supposedly encountered before sending out a distress signal, it's probable that the boat went down as a result of bad weather, bad design, and bad luck. The Rubicon, with only a dog on board, had the most simple explanation of all the ghost ships. It's widely suspected that the vessel actually left the port with no one on board. The second half of the news article cites suspicions from authorities that the Rubicon might have broken from her moorings in port and the unmanned vessel floated to sea with only the ship's resident canine on board. There was no crew to have gone missing. Flight 19. The training mission had been led by Navy Lieutenant Charles Carroll Taylor. During the war, he had accumulated over 2,500 flying hours, but he had become lost on 2 separate instances which required him to be rescued at sea. The day of the disappearances, Taylor had shown up late and asked to have someone else cover leading the training mission. This request was denied and proved to have terrible consequences. The tragedy of Flight 19 is chopped up to a number of human errors that all happened to coincide. First and foremost, it was a training mission where Lieutenant Taylor chose to monitor from the back of the squadron rather than the lead, and rookie mistakes in navigation could have led the whole crew astray. Even though it was an experienced crew, human error is something no one can avoid with absolute certainty. When the mission's leader had only flown in that region a few times, their attempts to find their footing and confirm their location took far longer than it should have. When you're flying with only a few hours of fuel, mistakes like that can have huge consequences. As for the rescue plan that disappeared in an effort to find Flight 19, the PBM Mariner was a specially designed rescue craft. But among those who flew them, these planes had the unfortunate nickname of flying gas tanks because of the large amount of fuel they carried on board to fly long stretches of time on patrol. Before taking off, it was routine for pilots to confiscate matches and lighters from the crew, as these planes were highly flammable from gas fumes. It's believed that the PBM Mariner exploded 2 hours after it took off. A passing merchant ship spotted a fireball and found evidence of an oil slick in the water around the time it was navigating the waters. Unfortunately, in-air explosions weren't entirely unheard of at that time. Flight 441. It could have exploded, but why wasn't a trace of the plane spotted? While today search and rescue missions have become successful in finding debris on the open ocean, humans would be foolish to think of missions over the Atlantic Ocean for debris as anything other than a search for a needle in a haystack. Water currents can move objects in many directions. Storms can whip up waves that damage and sink life rafts, and sometimes the human eye might miss the one floating life jacket among an expanse of hundreds of miles of untouched sea. The Navy's Aviation Board ultimately concluded, quote, R7V1 Buno 128441 did meet with a sudden and violent force that rendered the aircraft no longer airworthy and was thereby beyond the scope of human endeavor to control. The force that rendered the aircraft uncontrollable is unknown. It's tragic, but some accidents will forever be just that. Accidents. With unknown causes, unsatisfying conclusions, and an unbearable amount of pain for the families of the lost, whose final moments will be lost in mystery. Most of the mysterious accidents in the Bermuda Triangle can be attributed to human error, bad weather, or just an accident at sea. Perhaps it's because so few wrecks have been recovered that people have been so intrigued by the theories and stories. But the Atlantic Ocean is very deep, averaging a depth of 11,962 feet and reaching 27,493 off the Puerto Rico Trench. Deep vertical caves dotted throughout the Bermuda Triangle can create current that can sweep up debris and make recovery impossible. If a ship goes down, it's likely going to stay there where it landed, in a place where neither life nor light lingers too long. Perhaps one of the biggest questions of all is if the Bermuda Triangle disappearances are even higher than other parts of the world. We'll get to that, but like the accident in 2017 proved, our technology has improved, and the more evidence we can find as close as possible to an accident, the higher our chances of finding out what actually happened. So, what do we have to fear in the Bermuda Triangle today? There is a healthy level of fear to have when boarding a boat or plane, in the same way that you should have when getting in a car. Accidents happen, technology malfunctions, and people can get hurt. Both the US Coast Guard and Lloyd's of London don't think that there are any more instances of lost or wrecked vessels in the Bermuda Triangle than in other places. Going out in a boat or flying in a plane comes with inherent danger. But there is no inherent danger to the Bermuda Triangle that doesn't exist in other regions of the world. It is a tragic reality, but the nature of the sea and skies is that when humans venture out into them, we are at the mercy of Mother Nature. But the area known as the Bermuda Triangle does see more boat and plane traffic than many other regions of the world, given its location along heavily trafficked shipping routes and being at the intersection of 4 continents. Where there are more boats and planes, naturally it follows that there would be more accidents. Whether in the Bermuda Triangle or elsewhere, planes and boats see less people die on average than cars, something many people incorporate into their daily routines. Humans' level of comfort with danger comes with our familiarity. The Bermuda Triangle is a massive stretch of water reaching depths we can't reach and supporting life forms we have still yet to see. The mystery of the unknown gives our imagination room to invent, and while logical explanations of human error and weather are to explain for many of the Bermuda Triangle's stories, there have been mysteries about vanished planes all over the world, even in recent years. SS Waratah was a passenger ship set to sail between Australia and Europe. With 211 people on board, this 465-foot boat vanished in 1908 off the coast of South Africa and has still yet to be recovered. The first female pilot to fly across the Atlantic Ocean, Amelia Earhart, was on her second attempt to circumnavigate the globe in 1937 when she and her navigator, Fred Noonan, disappeared over the Pacific Ocean. Rumors swirled about Earhart being a secret agent, or even that she crash-landed and started a new life on a remote island. The disappearance of the celebrity and incredibly skilled pilot goes to show that accidents can happen to anyone and that tragedy over the seas can strike in the airs, not just above the Bermuda Triangle. The Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571, known as the Miracle of the Andes, saw a plane crash high in the Andes mountain range, but at the time, no one saw. For 2 months after a search had been called off, survivors were fending off freezing temperatures and resorted to cannibalism to stay alive. 16 survivors were miraculously rescued. This event in 1972 gave families of those lost in disappearances for years to come hope that their loved ones would have survived crashes, and gave them inspiration to continue looking long after searches had been called off. Most recently, Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370, a commercial passenger jet with 239 people on board, became one of history's most mysterious airplane disappearances. Documentaries have been made, podcasts created, and books have been written about what happened to the hundreds of people who vanished. Even in a day and age of unparalleled satellite imagery and radar detection, scanning the entirety of the Indian Ocean's surface, let alone what lies on its floor, is impossible today. But maybe one day we'll come across more wrecks to unveil the truth about the mysterious ends of these vehicles. But for now, the mystery of the Bermuda Triangle has been somewhat dispelled. Neither aliens, nor wormholes, nor mermaids seeking revenge are to blame. Rather, a coincidence of human errors, faulty designs, bad weather, and accidents are the common thread between the boats and planes that have met with odd ends in this region of the Atlantic Ocean. The Bermuda Triangle will live on for a long time to come, given its prominent role in pop culture. It's inspired movies and ghost stories around campfires, but its fantastical mystique has also distracted from the tragedy of people losing their lives. Today, developments in safety measures and search and rescue advancements makes the occasional accident so notable. While the public knows the Bermuda Triangle in and out based on its many stories and mystical powers, the U.S. Board of Geographic Names does not recognize the Bermuda Triangle as an official name and does not maintain an official file on the area. It might not live on in science since theories about it have been debunked, but its role as a cultural relic is undeniable and will live on for generations to come. Thanks for watching. The Panama Canal, now considered one of the 7 wonders of the modern world, was once the site of one of the world's greatest roadblocks in engineering history. In its long journey to construction, it took the lives of tens of thousands of workers. We all know the canal as a site of a smooth transition from the Atlantic to the Pacific and vice versa, but the land it crosses carries a dark, deadly history. The Central American Isthmus separates the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans but connects North and South America. At its narrowest point, only 50 miles of mountainous jungle and swamp separates the east from the west. Every day, up to 32 ships cross the Panama Canal, avoiding a lengthy trip around Cape Horn in Chile, but each ship that passes through floats on the blood, sweat, and tears of those who braved the equator's unrelenting heat to build the canal. Breaking up two continents is no easy feat. In some ways, constructing the Panama Canal was like building a waterlogged Great Wall. The construction of China's Great Wall is estimated to have claimed the lives of over 400,000 people. But things would be different with the Panama Canal. Millennia have passed, and machines have made construction projects much safer, right? In the 1880s, rumors swirled about building a canal in Central America. The invention of the steam engine, advancements in steel manufacturing, and improved concrete manufacturing techniques made large-scale engineering projects a lot safer and more efficient. It seemed like the right time to get started on a project that people had thought about for hundreds of years. The goal was clear, but what exactly it would take to get there was more than anyone had anticipated. To understand why building the Panama Canal was so deadly, we first have to understand the geography and conditions of the Isthmus of Panama. The strip of land the canal is built on is 30 miles across at its thinnest point. The canal itself is 50 miles from deep water in the Atlantic to deep water in the Pacific. Fortunately, to build the Panama Canal, engineers didn't have to start from scratch. The location of the canal coincides with the natural flow of the Chagres River. A key part of the canal's construction involved damming the Chagres to create a lake deep enough for massive boats to float through without running aground. This became Gatun Lake, which now takes up 160 square miles of flooded land. The original plans for the Panama Canal entailed digging into the earth 40 feet below sea level so the waters of the Atlantic and Pacific could mix. But as we'll see, that won't happen. Carving out the equivalent of a mountain was no easy task. Beyond that, engineers had to contend with the height difference between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. It sounds strange that one ocean would have a higher sea level than the other, but it comes from a combination of factors, including ocean currents, variations in temperature and salinity affecting water density, as well as the Earth's rotation influencing ocean circulation, all of which combined lead to the Pacific Ocean being about 40 centimeters higher than the Atlantic. This was a problem, especially when there was already a mountain between them. The task of building the Panama Canal was quite steep, almost exactly as steep as the two mountain ranges looming over the side of the future canal, the Tabasara Mountains and the Cordillera de San Blas. Nearby, the Cerro Jefe mountain top towers over 3,300 feet above sea level. The canal was set to run from Limon Bay on the Caribbean Sea to Miraflores Lake by way of an artificial lake that was yet to be created. Over the course of 12 locks, any ship passing through the canal will be raised and lowered 85 feet above sea level to cross. Using the locking system, the canal's designers were able to circumvent the challenge of flattening the Continental Divide. The Continental Divide is the mountain range that determines if rainfall will drain towards the Atlantic or Pacific Oceans. So what does this mean? Building the Panama Canal meant flattening a section of a mountain range. More than just layers of rock and large boulders, the area was also a densely packed jungle, swarming with pests and large animals, huge trees, and thick brush. Beneath this stretch of land that would be carved up to create the canal, a bedrock of slate and shale stood between engineers and the route they imagined. The proposed site would follow the path of the Chagres River, but also a Spanish trade route called El Camino Real de Panama that connected Panama City on the Pacific coast with its trading partner, Portobello, on the Caribbean Sea. The Camino Real was the only road for people to move valuable goods such as gold and silver from coast to coast through Panama. In 1850, construction began on the Panama Railroad, a 47.5-mile route that cost a total of $8 million. An estimated 6,000 died building it. While this is a huge number of casualties for such a short stretch of rail, it's only a fraction of the number who would die to build a canal in the years to come. Building the canal along this route was a nod to Vasco Núñez de Balboa, the Spanish conquistador who established Spain's first South American settlement. He was the first European to set his eyes on the Pacific Ocean. When Balboa wrote back to the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V with news of his discovery of an ocean, he was rewarded by becoming the governor of Panama. Balboa's expeditions and adventures to this region identified the most promising location for a direct passage towards Asia and Australia from Africa and Europe. But as a precursor to the devastation that would result from constructing the Panama Canal, the introduction of Spanish settlements decimated local populations. Additionally, Balboa brought enslaved African people to transport cargo along El Camino Real, establishing a new political, social, and cultural hierarchy that destroyed Panamanian beliefs as well as their native population. While the demographics of Panama changed drastically in the 19th century, its weather was quite consistent. Average temperatures in Panama linger around 80 degrees Fahrenheit, and it averages about 105 inches of rainfall a year. It's wet, humid, and nearly impossible to cool off in. Flooding was a regular occurrence, especially in the wet season. The tropical weather was quite the adjustment for workers coming from Europe and the United States. Even for workers coming to construct the canal from Caribbean nations, the mountain jungles of Panama were a different beast. But with the Panama Canal, the main cause of death would come at the hands, or really the mouths, of tiny insects. Today we know that infected mosquitoes transmit malaria parasites and the yellow fever virus when they bite people. But in the 1850s, people had no understanding of how these debilitating diseases were transmitted. Many medical professionals believed malaria was caused by something airborne coming out of marshes. Just take a look at the word's Italian roots: bad, mal, and air, aria. Yellow fever was also thought to be the product of humid air mixing with undrained soil. While they were onto something by noticing trends about humid environments and illnesses, they were way off in their understanding of how these diseases worked. Scientist Louis Pasteur had just proposed a theory that microbial germs caused disease, not things floating in the air or imbalances in bodily fluids. His theory became known as germ theory and informs how we think about cleanliness today. It revolutionized how scientists understood disease and gave them a blueprint for how to combat sickness. Another medical breakthrough in the time of the Panama Canal's construction happened when a French doctor made an astonishing discovery while treating patients for what was then called marsh fever. We now know this to be malaria. Dr. Alphonse Leveron was studying a blood sample from a sick patient. He wanted to understand what caused the disease at a biological level rather than just blaming the air. He was eager to understand the root of the disease, not only so he could better treat his patients who had it, but so people could avoid whatever was causing it. One day, he identified tiny wriggling forms swimming in the bit of blood he was examining. Leveron drew the connection that the moving dots in the infected blood mimicked the patterns he had seen in parasites, but it would be more than 20 years until scientists confidently recognized that those parasites he spotted were the same as those that were found in mosquitoes. Around the turn of the century, people realized that these insects actually transmitted those diseases. At that point, tens of thousands of workers had already made the trek to the thick jungles to work on the construction of the Panama Canal. Thousands had died from malaria and yellow fever by the time science could explain how the diseases were spreading. By the 1870s, central Panama had a few built-up cities populated by a combination of European expats and formerly enslaved people. Steam locomotives now frequented ports in Panama City, San Miguelito, and Colón. More and more attention was directed to the development of Central America, and in the middle of the age of imperialism, powerful countries from around the world began taking an interest in the potential of an interoceanic canal. The pipe dream that Vasco Núñez de Balboa had all those years ago seemed like something that could actually happen, given the recent breakthrough in Egypt. The Suez Canal, which cuts through the Isthmus of Suez in Egypt, wrapped up its 10-year construction project in 1869. It was a feat of engineering the likes of which the world had never before seen. Built across a 120-mile stretch of flat desert, it was a long but relatively straightforward build, the brainchild of Frenchman Ferdinand de Lesseps. Following the opening of the Suez Canal, fleets of steamships were trimming over 5,000 nautical miles off of trips from India to Europe. New ships were being designed that could carry larger cargoes for shorter distances. Trade was flourishing and port economies were booming. Of course, there was the huge human cost to build it, and while the numbers are hard to pin down, some estimates put the numbers of workers killed at over 100,000. But the everyday utility of the Suez Canal made it easy to look past the cholera outbreaks and deadly work conditions that the Suez Canal's 1.5 million construction workers faced. And despite the heavy casualties of the Suez construction, there was no hesitation when the idea arose of doing something similar in Central America. Led once again by de Lesseps, the French broke ground on the canal in 1881. He estimated construction would cost $132 million and take 12 years to complete. It was a fraction of the size of the Suez Canal, but because the terrain was so inhospitable, he estimated it would take longer. While he was right about that, his estimates about the cost, both financial and human, were very off. Just months after starting work on the canal, the first case of yellow fever was recorded, coinciding with the start of the wet season. Fortunately, with the huge scale of the Panama Canal project came a huge influx of money, and that money went straight towards a hospital. But even with plenty of hospital beds and nurses, mosquitoes were wreaking havoc on workers. To add fuel to the flames, these hospitals willingly surrounded themselves with little channels of water. These were made to discourage ants from attacking their vegetable gardens, but ultimately, they became hotspots for mosquito colonies. As insects of all kinds became a larger and larger problem, hospital staff implemented every tactic they could think of to address the problem. For some reason, they thought that placing water pans under bedposts would keep insects away. They were wrong. Yellow fever, malaria, and other pathogenic illnesses became known as the tropic fever. And tropic fever became known for wiping out thousands of workers on the Panama Canal. People would vomit black fluids from bleeding stomachs and turn yellow with jaundice. Whether on site on this isthmus or reading news of the conditions thousands of miles away, everyone started to realize the dangers of working in the tropics. Contractors who feared for their own lives kept dropping out of the project to the frustration of Ferdinand de Lesseps. But even with regular leadership turnover, excavation projects continued. At its peak employment levels, the French employed more than 19,000 people, bringing in workers from Caribbean islands, primarily Jamaica. More and more people were being brought in, which meant that disease-carrying mosquitoes had more and more bodies to feed on. On top of that, a civil war broke out in the city of Colón. In early 1885, revolts broke out in response to the newly elected president. Revolutionaries opposed to the new government briefly took over Colón, a key port city for the shipping of materials to build the canal. Rebels attempted to take over a shipment of American weapons and kept the men who refused to hand over the weapons as hostages. A battle broke out between the rebels, and Panamanian troops and U.S. seamen fought to protect their own interests. Eventually, tensions settled, but not before a massive fire swept through the city, decimating infrastructure and leaving thousands of workers homeless. As years rolled on and the death toll rose, progress plateaued. As of July 1885, only about 1/10 of the estimated total de Lesseps projected had been excavated. The French team were over budget, underperforming, and responsible for what is estimated to be the deaths of nearly 20,000 people. As logistical, natural, and architectural difficulties challenged the progress of de Lesseps' design, he refused to adjust his vision for a sea-level canal. So, more cohorts of workers would roll in and less would return home. De Lesseps wanted the canal entirely at sea level, like what he had done with the Suez, but his ambition exceeded the ability of the technology he had and the labor force he was working with. Unless his dynamite could explode 10 times more forcibly or his workers developed a sudden immunity to tropic fever, the Panama Canal seemed doomed. In May of 1889, all activity on the isthmus ceased. The French had to abandon the project that was supposed to be a home run for them. Tropic fever, inadequate medicine, and a poor understanding of science are in some ways responsible for the steep death toll of the Panama Canal. But other factors relating to the intense nature of the construction project led to many accidents that would claim more lives. Even after control of the project switched hands to American engineers who implemented mosquito control measures, the Panama Canal would still go on to claim thousands more lives. When the US took over the project in 1904, local Panamanian residents avoided participating in the building of the canal. They had witnessed the death that accompanied the first attempt to build the canal and wanted nothing to do with it. As a result, American and British contractors decided to import labor once again, primarily from the Antilles. Housing facilities were inadequate and food was sparse. At its busiest, up to 40,000 people were working on the canal at a given time. Generally, workers were contracted to 2-year stays. They would work for 4,500 hours over the course of their 2 years at a fixed rate of 10 cents per hour. A combination of language barriers, cultural differences, and racial animosity created social rifts between Americans, Panamanians, and Caribbean workers. When a crisis struck, be it an outbreak of disease or a tragic accident, these tensions only contributed to a deeper sense of unrest and frustration. But one notable shift that occurred after the Americans took over was the death toll linked to mosquito-borne diseases. When they took over the project, some people at the time jokingly considered yellow fever to be the first mountain to be removed. This made light in some ways of the fact that the canal's mission was to decimate a mountain, but acknowledged that getting a handle on the insect problem was paramount to connecting the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. U.S. authorities created the Isthmian Canal Commission to control the outbreak of yellow fever and malaria. By the time the 1900s came about, scientists were quite certain about the link between mosquito bites and the transmission of diseases. They set up a clear protocol for how to implement mosquito control. All pools in close proximity to houses and villages were drained. Brush and grass was cut to be less than a foot high. Buildings added insect screens to their windows and drains to stop mosquitoes from getting in. Quality of life improved as health standards soared. But while deaths by disease went down, the nature of the project itself grew increasingly difficult. In 1909, accidents overtook disease as the leading cause of death. In some ways, this was an exciting milestone that was testament to the power of mosquito control and advances in science. At the same time, it highlighted just how deadly it was to be a part of building the Panama Canal. In the course of moving hundreds of thousands of pounds of dirt, landslides and mudslides were frequent. Workers chipping away at the side of a mountain could be buried alive in a moment when a cascade of rocks tumbled down. When the United States took over the Panama Canal's construction in 1904, they could build off the partially excavated ditch the French had chipped away at. But they needed a new plan if they wanted to have anything more than dirt. 240 million cubic yards of rock and dirt were excavated under the Americans' command. With that many rocks to move, many people were injured, buried, and killed. Of the 56,000 workers employed between 1904 and 1913, the U.S. recorded that 5,855 canal workers were killed. The most deadly section of the Panama Canal's construction was the Culebra Cut. Spanning the Continental Divide, the Culebra Cut was the tallest landmass workers had to cut through. It was such a monumental task that those working on the project referred to it as Hell's Gorge. The section of mountainous land workers would need to excavate was almost 9 miles long. At its highest point, the mountain that workers needed to cut through was 335.5 feet above sea level. This wasn't going to be easy. Crews blasted the mountain with explosives. They used steam shovels to load loosened dirt into railroad cars, which would then carry it away. New machines like dirt spreaders, unloaders, and railroad track shifters helped the crew manage huge loads and find spaces to redeposit dirt from the canal's excavation. These machines could do the work of hundreds of men in just a few hours, but efficiency didn't necessarily mean things were safer. Using this heavy equipment high up on the canal's wall left workers in compromised positions. Unstable ground would regularly give way and people would be crushed or fall to their deaths. When heavy rains brought sudden floodwaters or mudslides, works on the floor of the canal could be buried. Some died of electrocution, others drowned. Once, an excavating machine accidentally set off some explosives and 23 men died as a result. Every construction accident that you can imagine happened while trying to create the Culebra Cut. Work in the canal was loud and hot. Workers were exhausted and eager to finish the project. As one of the mosquito control measures, workers were encouraged to drink quinine as an anti-malaria measure. But quinine treatment tended to cause high-tone hearing loss, and for workers navigating crowded construction sites with loud machinery echoing through the tunnel-like walls of the canal, it was easy to miss a message about where to stand and when to duck. The chaotic environment at the bottom of the canal lent itself to accidents, but work went on. With the final goal of creating a pass that was 300 feet wide and 45 feet deep, crews had to move a lot of dirt. It's estimated that over 60 million pounds of dynamite were used to make the Culebra Cut alone. Even with the temperatures soaring over 100 degrees, workers managed to lower the floor of the excavation site to within 40 feet of sea level. There's more to the Panama Canal than just its excavation. Construction of the Gatun Dam was essential for the Panama Canal's updated design. This earthen dam was a make-or-break feature of the canal. If it worked, it would create a man-made lake that would let boats pass the Continental Divide without having to level it to sea level. The plan was to dam the Gatun Lake at a height of 85 feet above sea level. To get boats up to the lake and lowered back down to sea level, engineers planned to use a series of locks to raise and lower ships. This way, they could use water control to push boats up higher rather than having to cut deeper into the unforgiving landscape. Construction of the locks began in 1909 and would wrap up in 1913 when work on the Culebra Cut and Gatun Dam also finished. A total of 46 gates keep sections of the canal at the proper height. To move a ship from one end of the canal to another, 52 million gallons of water are used. The exchange of water from one lock to the other takes a much smaller toll than the casualties that would have inevitably come about from trying to make the canal at sea level. Having control over the flow of water by using locks has proven to be useful for managing traffic through the canal. It also lessened the possibility that flooding in the wet season or a dry spell might leave the canal drained or impassable with rapids. The canal's construction not only changed the geography of the Isthmus of Panama, but also changed trade routes, balances of power between nations, and how humans approach nature. Over the course of the 30 years that it was built, machinery improved, engineering advanced, and we learned how to control previously unknown diseases. Once it was constructed, the Panama Canal was considered a triumph of the tropics, but it came at quite a high price of 25,000 human lives. If you're interested in more stories of doomed construction projects, check out The Real Reason Why Italy's Plan to Build a Bridge to Sicily Won't Work, or The Real Reason There Is No Bridge Between Russia and Alaska. Thanks for watching.
Imagine standing atop the highest peak on Earth, gazing down from Mount Everest's 29,031.7 feet, or diving into the abyss of the Mariana Trench at an incredible depth of 35,876 feet. As humans, we've conquered the most towering mountains and explored the deepest oceans. But there are places on our planet that are even more difficult to get to than these two extremes. Places so remote, so hidden, that they challenge even the bravest adventurers. The Earth's surface spans 196.9 million square miles. And on this vast planet, there are places that are even harder to reach than Everest's peak or the Marianas' dark depths. Are you ready for a journey to the most inaccessible spots on our planet? Getting around the planet is easier and faster for humans today than at any other point in the past. We have passenger aircraft that can fly hundreds of miles per hour, enormous ocean liners that travel across oceans in a little over a week, and cars that can drive people pretty much wherever they want to go as long as there are roads to get there. And sometimes, even if there aren't. We don't need to go too far back in time before none of these things existed. Ships have been around for tens of thousands of years, but it wasn't until the 1800s that ocean liners crossed the Atlantic. On January 29, 1886, Carl Benz applied for a patent for his vehicle powered by a gas engine, meaning the first automobile was invented just over 135 years ago. On December 17, 1903, the Wright brothers flew the first aircraft in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. We have obviously come a long way since all of these events, but one thing is still true. Regardless of how advanced technology has become, there are just some places on planet Earth that are extremely difficult to reach. Humans are born explorers. Our species evolved in Africa and migrated to every continent except Antarctica in less than 200,000 years. This may sound like it took a long time, but we have to remember that early humans traveled almost entirely by foot and small boats to populate the planet. There were no trains, planes, or domesticated animals to help with their journey, and yet by around 12,000 BC, humans had spread to 6 different continents. With all the technology we have today, getting anywhere in the world should be simple. But just because you may be able to see more remote regions from a distance, or by looking up images online, getting to some of these places is an entirely different story. So let's take a trip to some of the world's most isolated spots. Places so remote that reaching them requires not just courage, but extraordinary patience. Places where even time seems to stand still. Prepare for a journey where weeks might pass in pursuit of a single destination, and where the road less traveled truly exists. Are you ready for a true adventure? Let's start by going to Tristan da Cunha. These are a group of volcanic islands that sit in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. These islands have a population of just 235 people. There is no airport, and only 3 ships regularly travel to the island to bring mail, supplies, and passengers. The ships leave once a month from Cape Town, South Africa, which is approximately 1,732 miles east of Tristan da Cunha. The voyage between Cape Town and Edinburgh of the Seven Seas, the only settlement on the island, takes about 6 days, but since the ships only return every month, you'll likely need to remain there for at least several weeks before you'll be able to return to Cape Town. Tristan da Cunha is technically a British overseas territory, although the population has very little contact with the British government itself and runs everything on the island. Once you're on the volcanic island, there are even more difficult places to reach. The rugged terrain and sharp volcanic rocks make traveling across the landscape difficult. St. Mary's Peak is the highest point on the island at 6,758 feet, and climbing up the side of Tristan da Cunha volcano to reach its peak is no easy task. If your goal was to reach St. Mary's Peak, you would need to fly to Cape Town, get on a boat that leaves for Edinburgh of the Seven Seas once a month, travel the choppy waters of the Atlantic Ocean for 7 or more days depending on the weather, get off at Calshot Harbor, board a public bus to the potato fields, or convince a resident to drive you to the end of one of the very few roads on the island, and then hike the rest of the way up the volcano. Then, you'd have to do the same thing in reverse to get home, so the entire trip would likely take at least 2 months. It may seem unbelievable, but although St. Mary's Peak on Tristan da Cunha is a very difficult place to get to, it's not even close to being the most difficult. So what could be tougher than scaling a volcano on an incredibly isolated island? Let's head to the desert and find out. To qualify as a desert, an area has to receive less than 10 inches of precipitation a year. This often results in the amount of evaporation in a desert greatly exceeding the annual rainfall, leading to vast, sandy expanses, like you'll find in the Sahara Desert. The Sahara Desert is approximately 3,320,000 square miles. Getting to the Sahara itself isn't that difficult, since it encompasses the majority of 10 countries in North Africa. If you were to travel to Nouakchott, the capital of Mauritania, El Oued in Algeria, Timbuktu in Mali, Agadez in Niger, Ghat in Libya, and Faya Largeau in Chad, you would be in the Sahara Desert, so getting there would be relatively easy. But if you wanted to travel to the middle of the Sahara, then that's a different story altogether. It's hard to define where the exact middle of the Sahara would be. So for our purposes, let's define it as the spot where the borders of Niger, Algeria, and Libya meet. There are no population centers, villages, or roads in much of the Sahara. So how would you get there? Your journey begins with a flight to Ghat International Airport, a name grander than its reality, since in reality, it's little more than a runway. This is the closest airport to our destination, but even just booking a flight would present difficulties since it requires the aid of a travel agency with specific operations in Libya, and according to some reports, may not even be operational anymore. So instead, you'll be flying into Seba International Airport, another small airport that's also located in Libya, but over 100 miles further from your destination. There are now 4 main complexes to which certain members of the government are assigned. Unsurprisingly, the capitals of Niger, Algeria, and Libya, where major airports are located, are about as far away from the middle of the desert as possible and closer to the coast or a major source of water. Once you manage to get into the general vicinity, the real challenge begins. You'll need an all-terrain vehicle or dirt bike because the nearest road is a staggering 101 miles away. And you better hope your rental car has AC, since temperatures in the region can reach as high as a scorching 122 degrees Fahrenheit. There are no sources of water on your route, so any you see will just be a mirage, tempting you to wander off into the desert. And if you do, you're in real trouble, since there's no major landmarks to guide you or cell phone service to call for help in case you really get into trouble. So getting lost in this barren landscape isn't just an inconvenience, it's a death sentence. But while dangerous, the logistics of your trip to the middle of the Sahara are at least conceivable for an average person. So now let's look at some places where it starts to get really tough to even figure out how to get there. Beneath the chilling Arctic waves, shrouded in darkness, lies the Gakkel Ridge. Positioned between Greenland and Siberia, the Gakkel Ridge is the deepest mid-ocean ridge in the world and reaches depths of up to 3 miles. If you thought the top of the world was hard to reach, try exploring its hidden underside. Just reaching this geological marvel is a feat reserved for only the most intrepid of explorers. It requires a specially designed vessel that can break through pack ice and navigate the treacherous Arctic waters. Ships with these kinds of capabilities are nearly all research vessels, so unless you're a scientist assigned to study the Gakkel Ridge or have a lot of money to fund such an expedition yourself, reaching this geological feature will be tough. But let's say you managed to charter a special trip to the waters above the Gakkel Ridge. Once you reached the area by boat, you would need to descend into the frigid depths of the Arctic Ocean via submersible to reach the ridgeline itself. The Gakkel Ridge is approximately 1,100 miles long. Its peaks can rise 12,467 feet from the ocean floor, and its valleys can descend 1,600 feet deep. The logistics of getting a ship into position, deploying a submersible, diving to the top of the ridge, and then continuing down another 12,000 feet without being crushed by the pressure would make journeying down to this part of the ocean floor more difficult than many others. But there is another part of the ocean that is much deeper than the Gakkel Ridge. The aforementioned Mariana Trench lies in the Pacific Ocean, and one specific spot, known as the Challenger Deep, is the deepest known part of the seabed on the entire planet. The entire Mariana Trench is a little more than 1,580 miles long and has an average width of 43 miles. This makes the underwater mountain range longer than the Himalayas, which are 1,500 miles long. In fact, if you put Mount Everest at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, the peak would still be around 7,000 feet below the surface. Getting to the waters above Challenger Deep is relatively easy compared to reaching Gakkel Ridge. You would first fly to the island of Guam, which can be done daily from Hawaii, Japan, or any number of other countries in Asia. From Tokyo alone, there are around 4 direct flights to Guam each day. Once in Guam, you would take a ship southwest about 200 miles. You would then be sitting right above the deepest point on the planet. But the easy part is over, and if you truly wanted to reach the bottom of the trench, you would need some very specialized equipment. There are actually 3 different pools that make up Challenger Deep: the Western, Central, and Eastern pools. Each of these is over 35,761 feet deep, so any vessel that wants to reach the bottom of one of these pools must be able to withstand the weight of over 35,000 feet of water pushing down on it, which comes out to around 8,000 kilograms of pressure per square inch. Don Walsh and Jacques Piccard accomplished the first ever descent to the bottom of Challenger Deep in 1960. They remained the only 2 humans to ever reach this part of the planet for 52 years until 2012, when filmmaker and explorer James Cameron completed the first solo dive to the bottom of the Challenger Deep. In 2019, a deep submergence vehicle called Limiting Factor began conducting regular dives at the trench, and as of November 2022, 22 dives have reached the bottom of Challenger Deep, 19 of which were done by Limiting Factor. The only other limiting factor that is keeping more people from reaching the deepest part of the planet is the cost of doing so. While getting to the surface waters above the Mariana Trench or even Challenger Deep is actually pretty simple, it's those last 6.7 miles straight down that make the bottom of the ocean in this part of the world one of the most difficult places to reach. After going down to the deepest point on Earth, you may be expecting the highest point on the planet to be next, but this is not the case. Mount Everest's very name alone conjures images of daring adventure, unbreakable determination, and the ultimate conquest over the Earth's grandeur. But is it still the uncharted frontier it once was? While difficult to summit due to its thin air and extreme weather, over 6,000 people have reached its peak. And for those with the financial means and minimal level of fitness, the ascent is not only possible, but getting easier all the time. All you have to do at this point is stand in line as part of a human traffic jam, risking not just your life, but the life of your guide as well. But Everest's story takes a much darker turn. Once a symbol of human triumph over nature, it's now becoming a cautionary tale, as the adventure that lures thousands to its slopes has led to a crisis. The melting snow, once pristine and pure, now carries human waste down into the water sources of villages around the mountain. Corpses are left on the icy slopes until they can either be recovered or become a permanent fixture, a grim marker for future climbers. The allure of Mount Everest remains, but it may be time to add Mount Everest to a list of places you shouldn't go for ethical reasons more so than its difficulty. But whether we're going to the very top or the very bottom of the world, all of these locations so far have been places people have been before. So what about parts of the Earth that are truly impossible to get to? If we're discussing the most difficult places in the world to reach, then we need to talk about the places no one has ever been and places where no one will likely ever go, like the Challenger Deep and the Gackle Ridge, come with all kinds of complications. But this is because our oceans are vast. More than 70% of the surface of the Earth is made up of oceans, which means there is still a lot left to explore. We know relatively little about the ocean floor or the deep-sea creatures that live below the photic zone, which is the area where sunlight no longer penetrates the depths of the water. It's the sheer size and depths of the ocean that makes the sea floor one of the most unexplored places in the world. But what about the land? Are there any places on the surface of the planet where humans have never stepped foot? Surprisingly, yes. As we mentioned, Mount Everest has the highest elevation on the planet, with a peak that sits around 5.49 miles above sea level. But there are a couple of other mountains that are shorter than Mount Everest that have never been summited, making them some of the most difficult places to reach on the planet. However, before we explore these locations, here's a fun fact. Although the peak of Mount Everest is the highest altitude above sea level on Earth, it is not technically the tallest mountain. You might be surprised to learn that honor actually goes to a tropical paradise in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Mauna Kea is a volcano on the Big Island of Hawaii. Though it stands at only 13,796 feet above the sea, it hides a secret beneath the waves. Extending nearly 20,000 feet below the ocean's surface, Mauna Kea's true height from base to peak is around 33,500 feet, making it over 4,400 feet taller than Everest. But unlike Everest, if you wanted to hike or get to the top of the tallest mountain in the world, you wouldn't need to risk your life, destroy the high-altitude ecosystem of the Himalayas, or wear an oxygen mask. Instead, you could book a flight to Hawaii, hike to the summit of Mauna Kea, and be back at your hotel in time for dinner. But you don't want a vacation. You're looking for a challenge. You want to reach a place on the surface of our planet that no one else has ever been to before. So let's head from Hawaii to Southern Asia. Gangkhar Puensum is the highest mountain in the country of Bhutan and sits along the Bhutan-China border. Its highest peak is 24,836 feet from its base, making it just over 4,000 feet shorter than Mount Everest. But just because it is shorter doesn't mean climbing to the top is easier. In fact, Gangkhar Puensum has never been summited before, and it's not for a lack of trying. There have been at least 4 serious attempts to climb Gangkhar Puensum, and unfortunately for these mountaineers, all of the expeditions had to turn back due to high winds, seemingly impossible sections, and intense frostbite. In 2003, the government of Bhutan passed a law that made mountaineering illegal in the country, so while people can still hike along designated trails, expeditions cannot be launched to summit high-altitude peaks. Therefore, it would be illegal to attempt to reach the summit of Genkar Puensum today, which is definitely another reason besides the impossible ascent that the top of this mountain is one of the most difficult places to reach in the world. And it's likely that it will retain its title of the tallest mountain on Earth that's never been summited for some time. Then there is Machu Picchu. This mountain is 24,452 feet tall, making it slightly shorter than Genkar Puensum, but perhaps even more difficult to reach. A large part of that is because it is part of the Karakoram mountain range, in one of the most disputed regions of the planet. Pakistan, China, and India all claim that this part of the world falls within their territories, but due to the ruggedness of the terrain, no clear borders have been established. This means there are a number of factors standing in the way for anyone who wants to attempt an ascent to Machu Picchu. So while getting there is next to impossible, that's just the beginning of the adventure. The path to the top is a labyrinth of snow and barely defined ridgelines, a journey through a landscape that seems almost designed to repel intruders. If that wasn't bad enough, one of the largest glaciers outside the polar regions is found in the Karakoram mountain range and makes up the north face of Machu Picchu. Multiple attempts have been made to climb this mountain, but every single one has been turned back, primarily due to bad weather. The mountain's very inaccessibility and insurmountable nature have turned Machu Picchu into a symbol of the unattainable, the tallest mountain that can legally be climbed but has never been summited, and the challenges it poses are so significant that humans may never conquer its peak. Mountains don't serve as the only difficult locations to reach on land. Beneath the surface of the Earth lie cave systems that are just as mysterious and dangerous as the tallest mountains. Spelunkers who descend into the depths of the planet face challenges that rival and sometimes exceed those found on the highest summits. Hidden under the rugged landscapes of the Republic of Abkhazia, recognized by most of the world as part of Georgia, are the deepest known caves in the world. And within these, perhaps the most difficult place to reach is the bottom of the Veryovkina Cave, which as far as we know, descends 7,257 feet under the crust of the planet. To put that into perspective, that's approximately 1.3 miles straight down. It's like climbing Mount Everest in reverse, but harder and probably just as, if not more, dangerous. Adventurers have been exploring Veryovkina Cave for over 50 years, but it wasn't until 2018 that Moscow-based speleological clubs finally located the bottom of the cave. Doing so took them about a week, and as you can imagine, it came with a number of risks. One team nearly drowned when the cave began filling up with water during a flash flood, but thankfully, everyone survived. But while Veryovkina Cave holds the record for the deepest cave, we don't actually know how deep it goes, which is true of many large cave systems. The entrance to Veryovkina Cave sits between two mountains in the Arabica Massif. Just getting to the vertical shaft that leads down into the cave is difficult, but once there, things get even harder. Descending into this cave requires very specific skills and training, a lot of courage, and maybe even a little stupidity. The risks are high. An estimated 3 people lose their lives each year to cave exploration. And within these underground chambers, darkness is more than a lack of light. It's so deep and thick, you could almost touch it. There are few places on our planet where you can experience absolute darkness, but deep within these caves, you can't escape it. There are undoubtedly countless cave systems that have yet to be explored, and some might even be deeper than Veryovkina Cave. And the reality is that the very deepest may never be visited by humans, since they're extremely difficult or in some cases impossible to reach. As mentioned before, after early humans left Africa, they migrated across the planet and eventually reached every continent except one, and it would be many, many years before we would. Antarctica was the last continent on Earth humans hadn't stepped foot on until the early 1800s. At the time, many explorers actually believed there was a 7th continent known as Terra Australis Incognita, or the unknown southern land. However, no one had been able to prove it existed, so a number of expeditions were launched to confirm the existence of land at the southernmost pole of the globe. Early explorers ran into trouble when large pieces of ice would slam into the hulls of their ships and cause immense damage. It was dangerous looking for this unknown southern land, but expeditions continued to push the envelope. As global competition to claim more territory heated up, Russia, England, and the United States all sent ships to the frigid waters of the Antarctic to locate whatever land existed and claim it as their own. On January 27, 1820, Russian captain Fabian von Bellingshausen spotted a solid ice wall that was likely an ice shelf attached to what would later be named Queen Maud Land. 3 days later, a British naval officer by the name of Edward Bransfield sighted the tip of what we know today as the Antarctic Peninsula. An American sealer and explorer named John Davis is often claimed to have been the first human to actually step foot on Antarctica, but the exact location of his landing is unclear, and there are doubts about whether he actually made it onto the mainland. However, standing on the edge of Antarctica is one thing. Traveling across the barren landscape to reach unknown parts of the frozen continent is another. Now that everyone knew where Antarctica was located, the next step was to launch an expedition to find the South Pole. On December 14, 1911, Norwegian explorer Roald Amundsen, who was part of the race to the pole, finally reached the southern pole, though tragically he died on the journey back. But today, Antarctica hasn't just been visited, it even has a population of its own. Most are scientists doing research, but currently 18 countries operate year-round research stations on the continent. It is estimated there are approximately 10,000 scientists and support staff in Antarctica during the summer months and around 1,000 in winter. To be fair, Antarctica is no longer that hard to get to, as there are now airplanes and ships that travel there to deliver supplies and carry researchers back and forth. However, there are still parts of the landscape that are incredibly hard to get to, and some areas that have never been walked on by humans. Mount Sidley is the tallest volcano in Antarctica, at 14,058 feet high. Unlike Genkar Punsum and Machu Picchu, Mount Sidley has been summited, but the fact that it rests around 200 miles from the coast means that any expedition has to either cross the ice caps or take a specialized aircraft that can land in the snow. Then, using specialized gear, mountaineers would need to hike from the base to the summit and back down again without slipping and falling off the side of the dormant volcano. In January of 1990, New Zealander Bill Atkinson was the first to summit Mount Sidley while working with the United States Antarctic Program Scientific Field Party. Since then, around 10 expeditions have been launched to the volcano, but Mount Sidley remains one of the hardest places in the world to get to, not just because it is a tall, dangerous mountain, but because it is one of the most truly remote locations on the planet. A massive amount of Antarctica has yet to be explored, though, and likely never will be. There is a reason most research is conducted on bases during summer. During winter, the temperatures range from -4 to -22 degrees Fahrenheit on the coast, and -40 to -94 degrees Fahrenheit in the interior of the continent. However, satellites have detected temperatures dipping as low as -144 degrees on the frozen continent. Luckily, there are no polar bears in the Antarctic, as they are only found in the Arctic regions of our planet. However, there are an estimated 5 million penguins in Antarctica, which means they outnumber the human scientists there by around 500 to 1. Getting to Antarctica can be expensive, and once you're there, it can be an unforgiving landscape. But it is still possible to get there. There are, though, places on Earth that a human just can't go, no matter how hard they try or how much technology advances. So once again, we head back to Hawaii. These islands might be paradise to visit, but they are also home to one of the most inhospitable places on the planet. The Big Island of Hawaii has not one, but 5 active volcanoes, one of which, Mauna Loa, holds the title of the world's most active volcano. However, scientists believe that its nearby neighbor of Kilauea could actually be the hottest volcano on Earth. Temperatures of the magma inside of Kilauea are around 2,700 degrees Fahrenheit. This is hot enough to melt pretty much anything that goes in. Theoretically, a vessel made of pure tungsten could survive as it has the highest melting point of all metals at 6,191 degrees Fahrenheit. But there would have to be 0 impurities or vulnerabilities in the vessel. Otherwise, everything inside would be incinerated, If there is one place you can't go on planet Earth, no matter how much protection you have, it's inside a volcano. Although there is still one other place that is impossible for you or anyone else to visit, and it is not for the reasons that you might think. According to many world maps and even Google Maps until recently, Sandy Island is a small spit of land between Australia and the French territory of New Caledonia. This might seem like a nice area to travel to, and that it wouldn't even be hard to reach by boat. But no matter how hard you tried, you still would never be able to reach this island. And that's because it doesn't exist. That's right. Even though you can find it on maps, there is no such place as Sandy Island. Scientists from the University of Sydney noticed the mysterious island appeared on multiple maps, charts, and even Google Maps, but they didn't know anyone who had been there or even seen it, so they set out to find out what was going on. When the scientists got to the exact coordinates of Sandy Island, there was nothing but blue waters of the Coral Sea. The scientists did some further investigating and found that even though the island wasn't there, Sandy Island appeared on maps and publications going back for at least a decade. The scientists were baffled and had no explanation for where the island had gone or if it ever really existed. Australia's Hydrographic Service, which is in charge of producing the nation's nautical charts and maps, suggested the mysterious island could have just been the result of human error that was copied onto document after document for years. So if you're looking to get to Sandy Island, you are out of luck, as the only thing you'll find there is 4,620 feet of water. It's worth noting that although Sandy Island never existed, there are many places around the world that will become extremely difficult or impossible to visit in the future due to climate change. Scientists have found that emissions and pollution caused by humans have led to an average increase of about 2 degrees Fahrenheit across the globe, and it's predicted that by 2050, the global average temperatures will be 3 degrees Fahrenheit higher than they would have been without human-caused climate change. This may not seem like a lot, but we have to remember that these are global temperature increases, which include the Arctic, Antarctic, and glaciers across the planet. As temperatures increase, more snow and ice will melt, storms will become stronger, and the waters of the oceans will actually expand slightly. All of this will result in sea levels rising by 10 to 12 inches in the next 30 years. Many islands, some of which are currently inhabited, like Maldives Tuvalu and Marshall Islands, will be underwater. This means that the only way to visit them will be by chartering a boat and driving under the waves of the sea. So due to human-caused climate change, locations that are easy to reach today will be much more difficult to get to in the future. But even after remote islands have been covered by water, caves still descend miles into the earth, and mountains reach thousands of feet into the sky. The inside of a volcano will remain the one location on Earth that is truly impossible to visit.
Frigid waters, strong currents, deadly fog. These things made Alcatraz one of the most difficult and dangerous prisons to escape from in the world. But these were not the only obstacles that cost escapees their lives. The geography of San Francisco Bay has momentum-killing eddies and jagged rock formations carved from millions of years of erosion. Alcatraz was literally built to be a fortress. It was later turned into a prison because the surrounding waters and geologic features formed natural obstacles that kept prisoners contained. Join us as we explore the deadly geography of Alcatraz Island. Alcatraz, also known as the Rock, sits approximately 1.25 miles or 2 kilometers away from the mainland of California. The island is around 22 acres or 9 hectares in size. To its south is San Francisco. To the east are Treasure Island and Oakland. However, for any inmates looking to escape Alcatraz, it was the feature to the west that posed the biggest danger. Here, the Golden Gate Strait opens up the San Francisco Bay into the Pacific Ocean. It is this narrow passage that causes many of the deadly natural features around Alcatraz. Let's go back in time to understand why the island is the way it is. Before any structures were built, Alcatraz was covered in rocky soil, hardy shrubs, and a plethora of seabirds. The island sits between the San Andreas and Hayward Faults, which are located at the boundary of the Pacific and North American tectonic plates. These geologic features make the area prone to severe earthquakes, such as the 1906 San Francisco earthquake that cost the lives of 3,000 individuals and registered a 7.9 on the Richter scale. However, because of how Alcatraz was formed, it acts as a relative safe haven during the geologic events. It is almost completely solid rock, with very little sediment and anchored to the bedrock of the bay floor, which reduces the amount of seismic stress imposed on the island. Alcatraz was created around 100 million years ago when the Farallon Plate, which no longer exists, was pushed under the North American Plate at a subduction zone. This process led to the rising of the North American Plate, creating mountains along the fault line. Alcatraz was one of these mountains. Now let's examine 3 specific reasons why the geography and geology of Alcatraz Island made it so difficult for prisoners to escape. 1. The island's features. The cliffs of Alcatraz reach a height of 50 feet or 15.25 meters. There are small beaches, inlets, and caves that have been carved out of the island by waves and intense winds, but for the most part, Alcatraz is nothing but sheer sandstone. Even in the best of circumstances, the natural rock walls of the island are difficult to navigate. For an inmate trying to make a quick escape from the island, it was nearly impossible to reach the water without sustaining a serious injury. As previously mentioned, Alcatraz is only located about 1.25 miles or 2 kilometers from the piers and wharves of San Francisco, but due to the currents and several other geographic factors that will be discussed soon, a straight shot from Alcatraz to the mainland isn't exactly possible without a motor-powered boat. The island is isolated from land in all directions. From Alcatraz to Treasure Island, it's approximately 2.25 miles or roughly 3.6 kilometers. From Alcatraz to Angel Island, it's about 1.7 miles or 2.75 kilometers, and then another 3,100 feet or 966 meters to the mainland once on the other side. The Golden Gate Bridge is just under 3 miles or 4.8 kilometers from the rock, so no matter which way an escapee swam, there was no land within close proximity. The natural features of Alcatraz Island made it a fortress, which is exactly what it was first used for. This meant that the prison to come would be built on the foundations of an actual fort. Alcatraz is the peak of an underwater mountain that is isolated from every other piece of land in the San Francisco Bay by over a mile of water. Prisoners on the rock would be able to see the mainland, but reaching it would be nothing short of an unobtainable dream. 2. The water. Although the island's steep cliffs and jagged rocks make it extremely difficult to reach the shoreline, the waters surrounding Alcatraz are the most deadly natural defense it has to stop prisoners from escaping. The currents that rush past Alcatraz are a death sentence for even the strongest swimmers. Approximately 40% of the water from Northern California drains into the San Francisco Bay. All of that flowing water is eventually pulled into the Pacific Ocean through the Golden Gate Strait, which is approximately 1.1 miles or 1.8 kilometers at its shortest width and has a maximum depth of 377 feet or 115 meters. The San Francisco Bay is roughly 60 miles or 97 kilometers long and between 3 to 12 miles or 5 to 19 kilometers wide. What this means is that a massive amount of water flows through the relatively narrow passage of the Golden Gate Strait at all times as the bay empties out into the ocean. This is one of the reasons that the currents around Alcatraz are so strong. The bay is between 1,600 square miles or 4,000 kilometers if all of the sub-bay's estuaries and wetlands are included, which makes it the largest Pacific estuary in both North and South America. The massive water system that surrounds Alcatraz has currents strong enough to pick up sediment from within the bay and deposit it on the ocean floor just past the Golden Gate Strait to create sand wave features that are 3 stories high. An estimated 2 trillion liters or 530 billion gallons of water flows through the Golden Gate Strait during every tide cycle. This creates a water flow 160 times greater than the volume of water cascading down Niagara Falls during the same amount of time. What all of these geologic and hydrologic factors signify is that the water flowing past Alcatraz towards the Pacific Ocean is moving at around 5 to 7 knots, which is around 5.75 to 8 miles an hour or 9.3 to 12.9 kilometers per hour. The average human can swim around 2 miles an hour or 3.2 kilometers an hour, meaning that no one on Earth can overcome the current running past Alcatraz when it is at its most intense. For inmates on the island who wanted to escape the clutches of prison and decide to make a swim for it, the current could drag them out to sea in an hour to an hour and a half. And even if they could somehow construct a raft, which one group did, there are eddies throughout the channel that would hinder their escape. An eddy is basically a small tidal whirlpool where the water is moving in a circle. This causes a loss in momentum in these regions, which might not be a good thing if your goal is to use the current to paddle away from Alcatraz. It is possible for a raft to become stuck in the eddies as the exhausted paddlers run out of the strength needed to move their craft back into the current before being captured and returned to the prison. Even worse for an escapee is the fact that some of the currents actually flow back toward Alcatraz. This means that an inmate trying to swim for shore might get part of the way there and then find himself pulled back to the rock and the very prison he was trying to escape. At least one inmate's dead body washed back onto Alcatraz Island after an attempted escape while the prison was still in operation. The water and its currents are the most dangerous obstacle an inmate trying to escape Alcatraz would face. However, these things are by no means the most frightening. There are predators that lurk in the depths of the San Francisco Bay. In 1959, a great white shark attacked and killed a college student in the bay. Then in 2015, another great white was caught on camera breaching the waters off the shore of Alcatraz as it clamped its jaws shut on a seal swimming nearby. So, on top of deadly currents, anyone trying to escape Alcatraz would run the risk of being attacked by the apex predator of the oceans. 3. Weather. The air temperature around Alcatraz varies throughout the year. Between June and October, the average temperature is 69 degrees Fahrenheit or 20.6 degrees Celsius. However, the temperature can fluctuate from anywhere between 72 and 58 degrees Fahrenheit, or 22 to 14 degrees Celsius during this time. In the cooler months of December through February, the average temperature can dip as low as 46 degrees Fahrenheit or 7.8 degrees Celsius. The low temperatures mean that an escapee coming out of the frigid waters of the San Francisco Bay would need to immediately find shelter and a way to warm up to keep his body from going into hypothermia. However, the air temperature is only part of the problem. The water temperature around Alcatraz is so cold that it would shock the escaped inmate's body, and if he ventured out into the bay at the wrong time of the year, hypothermia could set in long before he made it anywhere near the shore. The water temperature around Alcatraz rarely gets above 56 degrees Fahrenheit or 13 degrees Celsius. This means that at any point of the year, an inmate's body could go hypothermic after only a couple of hours in the water. However, from January to June, the water temperature usually doesn't get above 53 degrees Fahrenheit or 12 degrees Celsius, meaning hypothermia could set in within an hour. The cold water in the bay is caused by the upwelling of cold, nutrient-rich water from the bottom of the ocean being circulated to the surface. The differing temperatures between the water and the air cause another deadly obstacle that inmates need to overcome if they have any hope of escaping Alcatraz. When the warmer air and the cooler surface water come into contact, condensation occurs. This causes fog. But the fog around Alcatraz Island and San Francisco Bay is not just a light mist, it is all-consuming. When the fog rolls into the bay, it completely blocks out any view of the mainland from Alcatraz. During these times, there would be no way for an escapee to know which direction to swim or paddle to reach safety. Under these conditions, it would be much more likely that the person would be swept out to sea long before they could reach land. The fog around Alcatraz can be so bad that it's led to a number of shipwrecks in the area. In fact, at least 24 sunken ships have been located on the floor of San Francisco Bay. It's estimated that the actual number of shipwrecks in the region is much higher at around 100, and some researchers hypothesize there could be at least 300 lost ships in the area. Many of these tragedies were caused by foggy weather conditions and intense currents. Before we dive into several escape attempts from Alcatraz by inmates, we need to examine the history of the island and how it became home to the most notorious and feared prison in the country. It is worth noting that while in operation, no one is confirmed to have successfully escaped the island and lived to tell about it. However, there are 3 inmates who we know made it into the waters of San Francisco Bay, but their bodies have never been found. We'll examine how these men managed to get out of the prison and reach the water later on. However, the chances that they actually made it to the shore alive are slim to none. Alcatraz Island's history begins long before European settlers traveled to the Pacific coast of North America. During the last ice age, prior to 11,000 years ago, what is now San Francisco Bay was a valley with a series of hills and rivers running through it. Over the next few thousand years, the Earth's temperature began to rise. By around 7,000 years ago, the ice sheets and glaciers had melted, dumping huge amounts of water into the oceans. This caused sea levels to rise by around 300 feet or 90 meters. The ocean water poured into the valley, creating what would become the San Francisco Bay. However, the peak of a few mountains still remained above water, one of which was Alcatraz Island. Before the flooding event, humans had migrated from Asia to the Americas. Some followed the ice sheets and shores along the coast and made their way further and further south. Others crossed the Bering Land Bridge that existed between Siberia and Alaska, following the migration of big game such as the woolly mammoth. Before European conquest, approximately 10,000 indigenous people belonging to the Ohlone tribe lived in the area around what would later be named San Francisco Bay. Based on oral histories along with archaeological and ethnic data collected from the region, it is believed that the indigenous people used Alcatraz Island as a place of isolation. It is theorized that tribe members or enemies who broke the tribal norms were banished to the island as punishment. The island was also used for its resources, such as bird eggs and the sea life along its shores. When Europeans arrived, Alcatraz Island was used as a hiding place for many indigenous people as they tried to escape the brutal campaign to eradicate their culture and assimilate them into the European way of life. And this would not be the last time that indigenous peoples used the island as a refuge. In 1775, Spanish Lieutenant Juan Manuel de Ayala surveyed the San Francisco Bay Area and created the first European map of the region. On it, he labeled an island about 1¼ miles off the main shore as Isla de los Alcatrazes, or Isle of the Pelicans. This would later become Alcatraz. On February 2, 1848, the Mexican leadership signed the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo to end the Guerra de 1847, also known as the Mexican-American War. The agreement stated that Mexico would cede 55% of its territory to the United States, including the land that would become California, Nevada, Utah, New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, and parts of Oklahoma, Kansas, and Wyoming. This meant that the United States was now also in control of Alcatraz Island. In 1853, the U.S. military turned Alcatraz into a fortress to protect the harbor from any and all aggressors. The following year, in 1854, the Alcatraz Lighthouse was completed and became the first lighthouse on the Pacific coast. In the following months, Captain Joseph Stewart and 86 men of Company H, 3rd U.S. Artillery were stationed on Alcatraz. When the Civil War broke out in 1861, Alcatraz became the stronghold protecting San Francisco from rebel attacks against the pro-Union northern section of California. 2 years after the war started, a temporary wooden structure was built on the island that served as the first prison at Alcatraz. The structure was expanded and became the first Civil War bastion and the first official army prison known as Uncle Sam's Devil's Island as well. In 1895, 19 members of the Hopi tribe were shipped off to Alcatraz for resisting the forced cultural assimilation programs conducted under the veil of what the U.S. called federal boarding schools. As a result of overcrowding during the Spanish-American War, the upper prison was built on the island. In 1912, the third prison, which is the structure that still stands today, was constructed using inmate labor. Those same prisoners then moved into the structure they had just helped make. Then in 1933, Alcatraz was transferred from the military to the Federal Bureau of Prisons, and 32 of the most feared and dangerous convicts were sent to the island for its reputation of being inescapable. In August of 1934, the prison structures on the island were modernized and fortified. This would lead to many officials declaring that Alcatraz was the strongest prison in the United States. For the next several years, high-profile criminals were continuously sent to Alcatraz, including Al Capone, George Machine Gun Kelly, Robert Stroud, also known as the Birdman of Alcatraz, and James Whitey Bulger. Even though the prison could hold up to 450 convicts, it was rare that there were more than 250 inmates housed at the facility at any given time. They lived in 10 by 4.5 foot or 3 by 1.5 meter cells, which they were only allowed out of to conduct their assigned tasks for the day. By the 1950s, it became apparent that running and maintaining the remote prison on Alcatraz Island was becoming costly. In 1959, a report concluded that Alcatraz cost 3 times more to operate than a comparable prison on the mainland. It cost $10 per prisoner per day to keep the facility running on Alcatraz, while it only cost $3 per prisoner per day in other prisons. This led to discussions about the long-term viability of Alcatraz. The same geographic features that made the prison impossible to escape also made it expensive to maintain. The continuous exposure to salt spray caused the structures on the island to decay. The strong currents and heavy fog made shipping supplies to Alcatraz difficult during certain times of the year. Engineers determined that all of the damage sustained during its decades of operation would cost $5 million to repair. On March 21, 1963, Alcatraz prison officially closed. But that was not the end of the story for the island. One of the least well-known events in Alcatraz's history happened in the 1960s after the prison closed, and it goes to show just how isolating it could be. In 1964, Richard Mackenzie and his wife, Belva Cottier, led a group of 5 Siangu Lakota Indians to occupy Alcatraz Island. The Federal Bureau of Prisons no longer used the island, and the US government hadn't found another use for it. The group of Indian Americans cited an 1868 treaty with the Sioux that stated that Indians from the reservation could claim any unoccupied government land. Technically, since Alcatraz had been decommissioned and abandoned the previous year, the island was unoccupied government land. The United States government showed no interest in the island until the 5 Sicangu Lakota Indians tried to reclaim it. The group of occupiers was escorted off Alcatraz Island several hours after the occupation began. On November 9, 1969, Richard Oakes, a member of the Mohawk Nation, led a group of Indian supporters to occupy Alcatraz once again, since the government still had no plans for the island. 11 days later, things escalated, and a full-blown occupation of Alcatraz commenced. The occupation would last 19 months and end on June 11, 1971. During this time, 80 Indian students from UCLA and an additional 20 other Indian people lived on the island. A council was elected to oversee the day-to-day operations, which include daycare, education, security, and cooking. The community on Alcatraz became self-sufficient by growing their own food, which meant they didn't have to continuously cross the dangerous waters around Alcatraz for supplies, and the blockade the US government enacted to try and force the occupiers off the island was useless. When 2 oil tankers collided in January of 1971, the government blamed the occupants of the island for the lighthouse and foghorn not working, since US officials decided to turn the power to the island off to force the occupants to leave. It was later acknowledged that the Alcatraz light and foghorn would not have prevented the collision regardless. After the incident, President Nixon approved a removal plan. On June 10th, fully armed marshals, FBI agents, and Special Forces police landed on Alcatraz and removed all of the remaining occupiers. The goal of the occupation was to raise awareness of the plight of the first Americans and advocate for Indian self-determination, which it successfully did. To keep another occupation from happening, the United States government designated Alcatraz a part of the newly created Golden Gate National Recreation Area. By doing so, it was no longer unused government land, although no work was done to repair the damaged structures on the island. Alcatraz Island became a National Historical Park in 1973. Now, let's go back and look at what happened to the inmates who tried to escape Alcatraz. There were no happy endings for these convicts, and as of right now, official records state that no one has ever successfully escaped the Rock. The facility had 1 officer for every 3 inmates, which was much higher than any other prison at the time. The inmates would be counted 12 times a day to make sure no one had attempted to escape or was hiding. To keep the prisoners in line, brutal tactics and corporal punishment were implemented. But perhaps the most disheartening aspect of Alcatraz for the prisoners was that they could see the San Francisco skyline from the island. It was a constant reminder that they were trapped without any real hope of escape. The very first escape attempt was made on April 27, 1936. Joseph Bowers was working the incinerator shift, burning trash from the facility, when he made a run for a chain-link fence at the edge of the island. He tried to scale it, but the guards spotted him and ordered the convict to halt. Bowers refused and was shot. He fell over 50 feet or 15 meters to the ground and died. He did not get very far, but it showed that prisoners were willing to risk their lives to get off the Rock, even though escaping the prison walls was the easy part. The cold waters of San Francisco Bay were the real obstacle, which several escapees would find out in the coming years. 4 other escape attempts by inmates were met with similar fates as Bowers. The guards fired and killed the prisoners or recaptured them with each attempt. Then, on April 14, 1943, James Borman, Harold Martin Brest, Floyd Garland Hamilton, and Fred John Hunter escaped through a window they had cut the bars off of in the Industries building. They knocked out 2 guards and tied them up. However, one of the guards awoke and managed to blow his whistle. The tower guards were alerted of the escape and spotted the fleeing prisoners. They opened fire at the men. Borman was struck by a bullet and fell into the water. He bobbed up and down in the dark waves of the San Francisco Bay. Brest managed to swim to him and held him above water, but as the guards boarded a boat and steered towards Brest, he dropped Borman, who sank to the bottom of the bay. Brest was hauled on board the boat and brought back to Alcatraz. Hunter had been injured while trying to traverse the sharp rocks along one of the cliffs of the island. As he entered the water and started to swim, Hunter realized he would never make it to shore. He took refuge in a cave on Alcatraz Island, but was discovered by the guards 2 hours later when they followed his trail of blood to the cave entrance. Hamilton tried to swim away too, but like Hunter, he decided he wouldn't get very far. He was found the morning after Hunter. This escape attempt just reaffirmed that escaping Alcatraz and surviving the swim to shore was a near impossible task. On May 2nd, a group of men launched the most violent escape attempt during Alcatraz's time in operation. 6 prisoners by the names of Bernard Coy, Joseph Kretzer, Sam Shockley, Clarence Carnes, Marvin Hubbard, and Myron Thompson coordinated with one another to overwhelm the guards in their cell house. They stole the keys from one of the correctional officers and made their way to the weapons room. The inmates made their way to the outside door but didn't have the correct key to open it, so instead, they took the 2 guards as hostages to try and negotiate their way to freedom. When it became clear that reinforcements had arrived and that there was little chance of escape, the 2 hostages were shot at close range by Kretzer. Shockley, Thompson, and Carnes had lost hope and returned to their cells after the murders. However, Coy, Kretzer, and Hubbard were not ready to give up just yet. U.S. Marines landed on Alcatraz Island and entered the cell block with the guards. In the ensuing firefight, 17 guards were killed along with 1 prisoner who was in his cell. Coy, Kretzer, and Hubbard were all killed. The final escape attempt at Alcatraz was made by John Paul Scott and Darrell Lee Parker on December 16, 1962. These 2 inmates made a makeshift saw, which they used to cut through a set of bars on a kitchen window. They proceeded along the edge of the island and jumped into the icy waters surrounding Alcatraz. Parker made it to a small rock outcropping called Little Alcatraz, about 150 feet or 46 meters away from the main island. The guards found him waving and shouting at them to come to his rescue. The cold water and strong current were too much for Parker, so he gave up before the San Francisco Bay could take his life. However, John Paul Scott kept swimming. The current carried him into the Golden Gate Strait and towards the ocean. He managed to keep moving diagonally through the current and made it to Fort Point, under the Golden Gate Bridge. He was shaking uncontrollably, suffering from hypothermia and exhaustion when he was discovered by a group of teenagers. The teenagers flagged down the guards searching for Scott in a boat nearby, and they took him to Letterman General Hospital before returning him to Alcatraz. For a brief few minutes, Scott became the only person to escape Alcatraz and all of its geographic obstacles and make it to the mainland. Unfortunately for him, he was too cold and tired to enjoy his short stint of freedom. The most famous escape attempt made by inmates at Alcatraz was carried out by Frank Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin on June 11, 1962. The 3 men meticulously dug holes in each of their cells in Block B to gain access to a 3-foot or 0.9-meter wide utility corridor behind the wall. They used a vacuum cleaner motor and a stolen drill bit, spoons, and forks to break through the walls next to their beds. They conducted their operation during music hour to hide the sounds of the drill from the guard. When they weren't working, they put up false walls to cover their holes. They also constructed dummies complete with realistic-looking heads made of plaster and papier-mâché and covered them with human hair. The 3 convicts acquired over 50 rubber rain jackets from their fellow inmates, which they later used to make a raft. Morris and the Anglin brothers are believed to have boarded their makeshift raft and paddled into the turbulent waters of the San Francisco Bay the night of the 11th. The currents that evening were particularly strong, and the water was a bone-chilling 52 degrees Fahrenheit or 11 degrees Celsius. The official FBI records conclude that the men never made it to shore, and their dead bodies were dragged out to sea. A number of rain jackets from the raft and life preservers have been found over the years, associated with the infamous escape from Alcatraz. But no one knows if the 3 men ever made it to shore or if they were consumed by the water surrounding Alcatraz. As of this moment in time, most evidence suggests that Morris and the Anglin brothers perished during their escape from Alcatraz. It is hard to believe that the men safely made it to shore when considering the natural geography of Alcatraz and the surrounding area. The island is over a mile from the mainland. The currents around Alcatraz make swimming or maneuvering a raft nearly impossible, and the frigid water is cold enough to cause hypothermia in a matter of hours. The weather, geology, and geography of Alcatraz made it one of the most feared prisons of its time, and it is for these reasons that there has never officially been a successful escape. Now watch, what is the safest place on Earth? Or check out this other video you might like.
We often associate many countries with danger for a number of different reasons. Whether it's a history of war and conflict, a severe climate, high rates of crime, widespread political corruption, dangerous animals, or some other factor, it's likely you can think of a few stereotypically dangerous countries pretty easily. This can be harmful when we make generalizations about a region of the world, especially when thinking about levels of poverty and other forms of inequality experienced in developing countries. But understanding which countries are most dangerous and why they're so dangerous can be important not only for individuals looking for safe travel destinations, but also for world leaders who develop alliances and provide foreign aid to countries in need. So what makes a country dangerous, and which countries are the most dangerous in the world? We will explore these questions in this video. One of the most useful tools in determining the most dangerous countries in the world is the Global Peace Index. The Global Peace Index is the world's top, most comprehensive data-driven measure of global peacefulness, and is a report produced by the Institute for Economics and Peace. The index examines peace and the economic value of peace, as well as how to develop peaceful societies, and represents the peacefulness of 99.7% of the world's population. The Global Peace Index uses data from highly respected sources around 23 qualitative and quantitative factors to measure the state of peace in countries and regions around the world. The factors measured include topics from 3 domains: the level of societal safety and security, the extent of ongoing domestic and international conflict, and the degree of militarization. The Global Peace Index provides a glimpse of some of the world's most peaceful countries, including Iceland, Denmark, Ireland, New Zealand, and Australia, but it also indicates the countries with the lowest levels of peacefulness. The index considers many factors in determining how peaceful a country is: deaths from global conflicts, economic impacts of violence, military expenditures and sizes of militaries, levels of deterioration in a country, risk of terrorism, homicide rates, incarceration rates, and other factors. You might be wondering, where in the world is most dangerous? Without further ado, let's explore the top 10 most dangerous countries in the world. The 10th most dangerous country in the world is Iraq. You may know of Iraq because of the ongoing military conflicts that have been based in Iraq for much of the 21st century. Iraq has been in a nearly constant state of conflict for several decades, beginning with an 8-year-long war with Iran during the 1980s, followed by the First Gulf War in the 1990s, a 2003 invasion by the United States military, years of sectarian warfare, and conflict with Islamic State militant extremists. Iraq is rated as among the most dangerous countries on account of its high political terror and instability, as well as high levels of terrorist activity and conflict with neighboring states. Famously, the Islamic State of Iraq and Al-Sham, also known as the extremist group called ISIS, has a strong foothold in Iraq and has rapidly become the most aggressive, ambitious, and deadly extremist movement on the planet. ISIS is a Salafi jihadist group that has led many terrorist attacks worldwide, which has caused thousands of casualties. The rapid expansion of ISIS greatly outpaced and eventually replaced Al-Qaeda, another infamous extremist group that preceded the formation of ISIS, demonstrating how great a threat to peace and safety ISIS is in Iraq and the Middle East. Though an international coalition had a territorial defeat over ISIS, which ejected it from its stronghold in Syria in 2019, operations continue to happen in Syria and Iraq, and ISIS oversees at least 19 branches and networks in Africa, Asia, and Europe. ISIS is best known for its lack of regard for human life and basic rights. Beyond the presence of extremist groups like ISIS, Iraq is also known for its undisciplined militia and authoritarian government. The military has a rigid and intolerant ideology and overtook a US-trained and armed militia that cost billions of dollars to establish. Many of the trained soldiers fled, leaving hundreds of thousands of Iraqi civilians unprotected. Beyond that, leaders of Iraq have struggled to control the spread of ISIS and extremist perspectives, and the government has become a relatively authoritarian state. Throughout the 21st century, there have been many coordinated attacks specifically related to bombings, targeted killings, and improvised explosive devices. Oftentimes, these attacks are from suicide bombings organized by extremist groups and are a symptom of political dysfunction in Iraq. One main driver of violence in Iraq is around the political polarization between political leaders and their opponents, especially between the Shia and Sunni people. In the early 2010s, high-profile targeted killings began to increase, specifically those targeting high-level politicians and government officials. These killings often serve as warnings, threats, or attempts to take back political power or control of a given territory. While Iraq is politically very tense and at times dangerous, the country has a rich culture with many shared values that are held in high esteem, like generosity and humility. Many Iraqis are very religious and relatively conservative, but Iraq is home to considerable cultural diversity, known for its unique music, food, art, history, and literature, among other things. Despite its reputation as very politically dangerous, a small but growing number of tourists have been going to Iraq to see its ecological and historical attractions. Many of these tourists are from neighboring Arab Gulf countries, but also increasing numbers of European and American tourists have also been visiting the country despite travel advisories warning not to visit. Despite not much conflict, some people believe that Iraq is becoming a safe tourist destination. However, many American and other tourists have been killed or detained as part of terrorist actions or military conflict while in Iraq. Clearly, Iraq poses a real threat to safety in terms of its levels of military conflict and polarization, as well as on account of the extremist groups and terrorism based in the region. So while that might sound dangerous, it's the safest country on our list. Who can be more dangerous than Iraq? The 9th most dangerous country on the planet is Sudan. You might be familiar with the fact that Sudan is one of Africa's largest countries and that it has more pyramids than Egypt does. But you probably don't know much about why many governments worldwide recommend that their citizens avoid travel to this beautiful African country. So what's so dangerous about Sudan? Sudan is rated as 9th most dangerous because of the accessibility of weapons in the country, high rates of organized internal conflict, political instability, and terror, and high amounts of United Nations peacekeeping funding received in Sudan. Sudan is a country where security and safety is currently very volatile. Many governments have put out advisories indicating to their people that travel to Sudan is not recommended. Australia advised any citizens in Sudan in August 2023 that they should strongly consider leaving the country as soon as possible because violence can escalate at any moment. Tourists and foreigners in Sudan have been experiencing various attacks, including assaults, home invasions, and looting. And there's a serious risk of terrorism and kidnapping targeted at foreigners as well. The country also houses many landmines and unexploded remnants of prior wars. So, aside from main roads and paths labeled as having been demined, people in Sudan risk setting off old explosives. Like in Iraq, many of Sudan's threats to safety lie in long-standing political conflicts and state disintegration. Among these disputes are human rights violations, marginalization of minority groups, the concentration of power and wealth in Khartoum, the capital of Sudan, the growing political and economic powers of the army and paramilitary groups, and widespread poverty in the country. Sudan is known for covering a vast territory and for its ethnic and religious diversity. Since gaining its independence from Britain and Egypt in 1956, Sudan has experienced a long history of civil wars and power struggle between the political center in Khartoum and its southern and western peripheries. On top of this, for 3 decades between 1989 and 2019, Sudan's president Omar al-Bashir allied with radical Islamists to persecute non-Muslims and remote African tribes across Sudan. Beyond the considerable risk of threats to physical safety in Sudan, there are also many risks to health in the country. As of 2023, Sudan is experiencing an outbreak of cholera and vaccine-deprived poliovirus. Cholera can cause diarrhea, vomiting, and leg cramps, and these rapid loss of body fluids lead to dehydration and shock. Without adequate treatment, cholera can lead to death within hours. Also prevalent in Sudan are many insect-borne diseases, including yellow fever, malaria, Zika virus, and dengue. HIV and AIDS, which are passed through bodily fluids, and infectious diseases like hepatitis and typhoid. Sudan also is dangerous for people engaging in various activities on account of its strict adherence to Islamic Sharia law. Same-sex relations, extramarital sexual activity, and efforts to convert Muslims to Christianity are all illegal, as well as taking photographs of military installations, infrastructure, and in various places in Sudan. Despite being associated with danger, many see opportunities in Sudan for democratization and massive military reforms, with a lot of work to be done. With its rich history and beautiful sights including pyramids, the Kingdom of Kush, and biodiverse marine wildlife, Sudan is a place of natural beauty that many people can appreciate and is part of a major project to combat desertification and climate change. You could argue that Sudan is at the very least an environmentally safe place to be. But how dangerous is the next country on our list, located fairly close to Sudan? The 8th least peaceful country in the world is Somalia. You may know Somalia as Africa's easternmost country, located on what is called the Horn of Africa. Somalia is rated by the Global Peace Index as 8th most dangerous given the accessibility of weapons in Somalia and high rates of organized internal conflict and violent crime, as well as political terror and instability, terrorist activity, and high rates of displaced Somali people. Somalia is ranked as the second poorest country in the world, following Burundi, with 70% of Somalis living in poverty and most Somali people depending on livestock and agriculture for income and food. However, because of many dry rain seasons, the country has been impacted by famine resulting from failed crops and dead livestock. In 2011, a famine killed as many as 250,000 people in Somalia, half of which were children. Somalia also experiences the impacts of extreme weather, violence, and disease, as well as climate change. Poor health and disease are also experienced by many Somalians. Somalia is considered to be one of the most unstable countries in the world, and some people go as far as saying that Somalia is governed by anarchy and endless chaos. Somalia has been host to an ongoing civil war since 1991, after the country's dictator, Siad Barre, was overthrown. Ever since, the extremist group Al-Shabaab has been in power ever since. The civil war has resulted in nearly 500,000 deaths over the past 3 decades, with 3,000 people dying every year in recent years. Somalia has been through suicide bombings, medieval-style stonings, white phosphorus bombs, beheadings, and heavily armored pirates hijacking vessels that pass through the adjacent Gulf of Aden. Somalia has been impacted by the whims of warlords, buccaneers, kidnappers, bombers, Islamic extremists, and freelance gunmen. Young people often can access guns, but do not have formal education. In some parts of Somalia, civilians are made to pay fees to armed militia or participate in hostilities. At the same time as all this violence, there's a simultaneous humanitarian crisis in Somalia related to both conflict and climate change, which has resulted in significant displacement of Somali people. By the year 2018, nearly 1 million Somalis had become displaced from their homes, with 300,000 fleeing from violence and attacks, and over 500,000 farmers and pastoralists displaced from climate disasters including flooding and drought. In 2019 alone, nearly 600,000 Somalis were displaced, which meant over 4 million Somalis were in need of humanitarian assistance. You may be surprised to learn that climate change is known to exacerbate conflict, as competition for fertile land, access to clean water and food, and other issues cause growing political tensions amidst already existing conflicts. In Somalia's pastoralist communities, conflict has been growing as a result of flooding and drought. Despite the mass immigration of Somalis to safer countries, many Somalis have fled to urban areas, and many people who previously immigrated to neighboring countries like Kenya, Ethiopia, Uganda, and Yemen are returning. This may indicate improvements or hopes of re-establishing life in Somalia, but it may also indicate escalating conflicts in the countries where people fled to for protection. As you can see, Somalia is clearly a country plagued by conflict and climate-related impacts, which poses significant and possibly deadly risk to the people living there. Ukraine is among them, ranked as the 7th most dangerous country in the world presently. You might recognize Ukraine because of its occupation by Russia, which has captured attention around the world. The prominent reasons for Ukraine's 7th most dangerous ranking include political instability, high rates of organized conflict internally, and high rates of death from internal conflict, easily accessible weapons, poor relations with neighboring countries, currently Russia, and high rates of displaced people. In the areas of Ukraine occupied by Russia, the Ukrainian government has no jurisdiction, and in many places there are no government services available that are usually meant for public safety, including police officers, hospitals, firefighters, and ambulance services. Several countries, including the United States, the United Kingdom, and Australia, have all advised their citizens to avoid all travel to Ukraine as a result of Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. The invasion caused many Ukrainian people to flee to neighboring and nearby countries like Poland, Hungary, and Slovakia. Ukraine has a high risk of pickpocketing, especially in tourist areas, bars, and nightclubs, and especially on public transit and scamming. There are also common muggings and armed robberies that especially take place in central Kyiv. Beyond these personal attacks, Ukrainian authorities have already disrupted a number of planned terrorist attacks in Ukraine, with terrorism also deemed a high risk. Given how unpredictable the status of Ukraine's safety from conflict, terrorism, and Russian influence can be, it's clear that people in Ukraine are experiencing uncertainty and real risk to life and safety under Russia's occupation. However, the future of Ukraine's safety remains to be seen. It may come as no surprise that the sixth least peaceful country in the world right now is Russia. When you think of Russia, you probably think of the country's recent unprovoked occupation of Ukraine, but you might also think of Russia's Soviet history and ongoing tensions between the United States and Russia in the Cold War, especially during the arms race. Russia comes in the sixth most dangerous spot on account of its high rates of weapons exports, deaths from international conflicts, and number of external conflicts engaged in. Russia is also ranked highly for conflict with neighboring countries and a number of nuclear and heavy weapons. Though Russia has a long history of involvement in war and conflict, as a major power during both World Wars and the Cold War, some political experts believe that the present moment is the maximum point of Russian danger we have experienced thus far. Russia has begun weaponizing global food exports, attacking Ukrainian ports and cities, and seems willing to strike infrastructure and civilians in their attacks. Seeing as Russia has ready access to nuclear weapons and is growing increasingly desperate as many world powers seek to counter the Russian occupation of Ukraine, the risk of an act of nuclear warfare is an accessible escalation that makes Russia a dangerous and unpredictable nation-state. Visiting Russia is discouraged in many travel advisories, which mainly cite the country's partial military mobilization in Ukraine, though pickpockets and terrorist threats also pose a significant risk for travelers. The United States has also advised its citizens that there's a potential for harassment and detention of U.S. citizens, and that the U.S. Embassy has a limited ability to help U.S. citizens who are in Russia. Famously, WNBA star Brittany Griner was recently held for 10 months in a Russian prison for possession of marijuana, and the United States had to arrange a prisoner exchange for her return. Russia is also known for being a very authoritarian state, with often corrupt officials and inconsistent protections for the right to peaceful assembly and freedom of expression, so people involved in political or social protests can be detained for speaking out against the Russian government. It seems Russia poses a real risk for not only people living in its country, but also for Ukraine and global powers worldwide, especially as it persists in its occupation of Ukraine. But still, there are 5 more countries ranked more dangerous than Russia. The world's 5th most dangerous country is the Democratic Republic of Congo. You might be familiar with the fact that the Congo is endowed with abundant natural resources, including minerals like cobalt and copper, arable land, the potential for hydroelectric power, rich biodiversity, and the second largest rainforest in the world. The Congo is ranked as 5th most dangerous because of its high rates of internal conflict and violent crime, including homicide, as well as easy access to weapons. For decades, conflict in the east side of the country has prompted competing rebel factions to fight over control of diamond and mineral mines. One journalist with The Guardian has said that Congo is the world's most dangerous place for women, explaining that soldiers from the East Congo routinely terrorize communities and subjugate villages, attacking old women and young children alike. Women in Eastern Congo are also subjected to horrific physical violence. This approach to establishing political and social control clearly hurts the women living in East Congo and indicates how a culture that has a prevalent misogyny and gender-based violence harms Congolese women. At the same time, political instability in the Democratic Republic of Congo contributes to ongoing threats of terrorist attacks and frequent attacks on civilians and government officials alike. Large-scale protests also often take place unpredictably and end unexpectedly. Not only that, but there's a high rate of kidnapping and crime in Congo, often targeting foreigners. The country has an extreme rate of poverty and a prevalent climate of impunity, so violence and criminal activity is a high risk in the Congo. Despite the clear violence that is prevalent, especially in the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of Congo, the unique biodiversity, wildlife, indigenous cultures, and geological wonders found in the Congo attract many tourists each year, despite the clear dangers that the country poses. Still, the violence and political instability of the Congo explains why it was ranked as 5th most dangerous in the world. Rated as the fourth most dangerous country in the world is South Sudan. You might be wondering, wait, there's such a thing as South Sudan? Unsurprisingly, South Sudan is located directly south of Sudan and is the world's newest country, gaining independence from Sudan in 2011. South Sudan is the fourth most dangerous country in the world because of its high rate of UN peacekeeping funding received, as well as the overwhelming displacement of South Sudan's people, high rates of homicides and violent crimes, considerable political instability and terror, and significant rates of organized internal conflict. South Sudan has one of the youngest populations in the world, with the median age of 14.8 years old. But it also has one of the lowest average life expectancies in the world, with 59.16 years as the average lifespan. As a reasonably new country, however, armed conflict is ongoing between various political and ethnic groups, and weapons are readily accessible to citizens. Further, cattle raids are common throughout South Sudan, which also often spark conflict between citizens. The United States has advised its citizens that foreign nationals in South Sudan have been subjugated to sexual assault, armed robberies, and other violent crimes, and that kidnappings, carjackings, shootings, and ambushes are also common in South Sudan. Journalists, in particular, face a considerable risk in South Sudan, as reporting without proper documentation is illegal, and any journalistic work is very dangerous. Many journalists have been harassed or even killed in South Sudan. It's clear that the dangers posed by South Sudan relate to the country's recent establishment and associated political and interpersonal conflicts. As such a young country, South Sudan has the potential to become a safer place to live and visit as it matures as a country and government, but we still have to wait and see. Syria is rated as the third most dangerous country in the world right now. You probably recognize the country Syria because of the massive onslaught of Syrian refugees who have been seeking asylum since as early as 2011. Syria is ranked as the third most dangerous given its high rate of homicide and readily accessible weapons, high rates of organized internal conflict and violent crime, considerable political terror and terrorist activity, tense relations with neighboring countries, and high rates of displaced people. Syria has been in a state of active armed conflict for over a decade, and all parts of the country are reportedly impacted by violence. Acts of violence include armed kidnappings, unjust arrests and detentions, chemical warfare, shelling, and aerial bombardment of civil centers, and pose a risk of serious injury or death to all impacted. Terrorism is also prevalent in Syria, and many parts of Syria have experienced bombings and assassinations, as ISIS and al-Qaeda affiliates have taken power. At the same time, Syrians have experienced the destruction of infrastructure, housing, medical facilities, schools, power and water utilities, and more, which all impact safety and well-being of Syrian people. The government has also actively suppressed protests and demonstrations through aggressive tactics. Many protesters and political dissenters are routinely detained without access to legal representation or communication with friends and family. Syria's government detention centers are notoriously unsanitary and inhumane. Cruel, disregarding torment of detainees have been recorded. This includes torture and extrajudicial killings. These Syrian detention centers have especially unjustly detained minors, disabled people, and older adults. As a result of all political instability and violence present in Syria, many Syrians have sought asylum elsewhere, with 6.8 million of the world's 53.2 million refugees coming from Syria. Not only is there political violence impacting Syrians, but Syria is also known to have a severe lack of medical care and education access, and water and food contaminated with infectious diseases like typhoid and hepatitis. Most commercial airlines do not travel to Syria, so refugees have challenges leaving the country. At present, it's clear that Syria is a dangerous country to live in, and the impacts of Syrians living in the country are subjected to severe living conditions. But unfortunately, things can get even more dangerous. The country ranked as second most dangerous on the globe right now is Yemen. You might have heard about how Yemen is known for its historic ruins from the Roman Empire, along old frankincense and myrrh trade routes. The reasons Yemen is ranked as second most dangerous include its considerable access to weapons, high rates of violent crime, political instability and terror, significant organized conflict internally and subsequent deaths, and high rates of displaced people originating from Yemen. Yemen has been in a civil war for 8 years, and this war has prompted the deaths of thousands of Yemeni people, and a major humanitarian crisis. When in 2011, Yemen forced its authoritarian president Ali Abdullah Saleh to hand over power. The new president, Abdrabba, was left to deal with major economic problems and security concerns related to jihadist attacks. At that time, the Houthis, Yemen's Zaidi Shia Muslim minority, seized control of Sada province of Yemen and the nation's capital in 2014 and 2015. In spite of the violence in Yemen, Yemenis are fairly hospitable people who strongly value community and familial relationships. Support and familial interdependence are very important to many Yemeni people. With such strong values within Yemeni communities, the fact that Yemen is so dangerous might seem surprising. Even so, Yemen is largely considered one of the most dangerous places on the planet. Much of the conflict in Yemen is related to control over territory and oil resources, as well as national military and political power. As fighting spread throughout the country, citizens have been forced to flee their homes, and 4.5 million people, one of every 7 Yemenis, has been displaced by Yemen's conflicts, and 24.1 million people, or 80% of the Yemeni population, need humanitarian aid and protection. At the same time, tens of thousands of Yemeni people are experiencing famine-like conditions, and 6 million more are on the brink of famine. Evidently, the impacts of Yemen's years of conflict include displacement, hunger, lack of healthcare, unsafe water, the deaths of more than 11,000 children, and major cholera outbreaks impacting a suspected 2.5 million people and killing 4,000. It's no question why Yemeni is toward the top of the list when it comes to the world's most dangerous countries, as the country faces a major humanitarian crisis impacting millions of people. And yet, despite everything we've heard, there's still one country that's more dangerous than all of the others. Finally, the most dangerous country in the world is Afghanistan. You probably recognize Afghanistan from the invasion led by the United States in 2001 to eliminate the terrorist group Al-Qaeda. This followed the September 11th attacks impacting New York City and Washington, D.C., caused by terrorist actions. Afghanistan takes the #1 spot in terms of most dangerous countries because of its readily accessible weapons, high rates of violent crime, political instability and terror, and deaths from internal conflict. Afghanistan also has a relatively high military expenditure and high rates of internal conflicts, as well as high rates of domestic and international conflict. The country is also ranked as having considerable numbers of displaced people and poor relations with other countries. The state of security in Afghanistan is extremely volatile, with ongoing and significant threats of terrorism throughout the country, including the airport and religious sites. United Kingdom travel advisories warn citizens that there's a heightened risk of British nationals being detained without notifying the British government, and these detentions may be lengthy. The Taliban, an extremist group in Afghanistan, took full control of Afghanistan in 2021. The country's new rulers perpetrate numerous human rights abuses, which are evident in the famine, worsening sanitation, collapsing healthcare system, and considerable violence experienced by people living in Afghanistan. Under the Taliban's control, the government of Afghanistan is authoritarian and oppressive, and the country is plagued by terrorism and political violence. Terrorist attacks often are deadly and claim many civilian lives and infrastructure. As a result, the risk of kidnapping, violent crime, gender-based violence, harassment, and armed conflict are very high for everyone in Afghanistan, especially foreign nationals. Given the unstable security in Afghanistan, criminals often take advantage of the country's condition to violently attack travelers. Those at the most risk include foreigners, human rights advocates, journalists, judges and prosecutors, religious scholars, healthcare workers, and even civilians. Sometimes forced marriage can impact foreign nationals visiting Afghanistan, occasionally without knowledge or consent. Some criminals will also use explosive devices and firing rockets, as well as armed assaults and ambushes to kidnap or harm people in Afghanistan. Throughout the countryside, Afghanistan has millions of landmines, which also pose a severe threat to safety. Beyond all this, the widespread poverty, political turmoil, all threaten the well-being of those in Afghanistan. It makes sense that as a country that is so politically unstable and so impacted by violence, Afghanistan rounds out our list as the most dangerous country in the world. As you can see, our world is full of countries that pose danger to the people who live in and visit them. However, all of the threats to safety in a given country look different depending on the social, political, and economic contexts of a country. Some countries are threatened by invasion, while others are invading other countries. Some countries are plagued by famine and poverty, and others are facing terrorist violence and civil war. Violence and danger can look different in different parts of the world, but one thing remains the same. Millions of civilians worldwide are impacted, hurt, and displaced by the dangers discussed today. When thinking about where the safest place on Earth is, many people first look to violent crime and war as indicators of risk and danger. So-called dangerous cities and countries are easy to brainstorm. Whether cities like St. Louis, Missouri, which has one of the highest rates of violent crime in the United States, Gary, Indiana, where the likelihood of being a victim of a property or violent crime is 1 in 29, and San Pedro Sula in Honduras, which is ranked the most violent city in the world. Countries in conflict like Syria, Yemen, and Afghanistan are also viewed as dangerous. But when considering what makes a place safe, rates of crime and proximity to military conflict are not the only factors to consider. For instance, Japan has long been one of the safest countries in the world, with low rates of violence and petty crime. However, you might be surprised to learn that as recently as 2011, Japan posed the highest risk of death by fire in any developed country, followed closely by the United States. Japan also reported the fourth highest rate of earthquake fatalities between 1900 and 2016. Though Japan can be considered fairly safe in terms of crime, its reputation as safe does not consider vulnerability to natural disasters. As you can see, environmental safety and risk of violent crime are just a few factors of many that weigh into whether a place is the safest place on Earth or not so safe after all. In addition to factors like violence and natural disasters, many safety ratings consider health outcomes, such as life expectancy or rates of certain diseases within a population, as well as environmental factors such as access to clean air and water. So what makes a place safe? And where are the safest places on the planet? Let's find out! Before we dig into the hard data surrounding things like crime rates and health risks, we have to address something that is not so black and white, yet still very important. We're talking, of course, about people's perception of where they feel is safest. Many people tend to perceive certain places to be safer than others, and that feeling of safety is important, whether or not these feelings are backed by the data. Feeling safe will encourage people to live in certain places over others, and perceptions of safety can become widespread, influencing where we choose to live. According to one global study, the safest place in the world, according to perception, include many European countries like the Netherlands, Sweden, Austria, Finland, and Norway, as well as Canada and Australia. New Zealand was seen as the third safest country according to the study, with Denmark taking the number 2 spot. The safest country in the world, based on purely perception, is Switzerland, which also holds the number 1 spot for best country overall in another US news ranking. Though Switzerland may be seen as the safest, there are many competing factors that would put the validity of this view in jeopardy. Views on safety are largely impacted by one's identity and background, including race, gender, class, ethnicity, and a number of other factors. For example, in general, women tend to be more concerned about their personal safety and take more safety precautions than men. This is especially related to fears of sexual violence, and their concerns are valid. While women consistently have lower rates of experiencing violent crime in general, women are twice as likely to experience sexual violence. So a woman might perceive places with poorly lit streets and isolated alleyways as more dangerous than a man, with the contrast in perception being closely tied to gender identity. Not only that, some conditions like policing are perceived as a sign of safety by some parts of the population and are seen as dangerous by others, based on their backgrounds and related experiences. For instance, while some may view a strong presence of law enforcement as a sign of enhanced safety, research shows that many members of racial and ethnic minorities view law enforcement with more suspicion and distrust than white people generally do. Experiences with police can greatly vary based on a person's ethnic and racial background, which in the case of negative interactions can lead to distrust and a feeling of unsafety. Unsurprisingly, people who identify as non-white tend to disproportionately report unfair treatment by law enforcement officers, which is correlated with lower trust in police. These widespread sentiments of distrust reached a national scale during the Black Lives Matter movement in the United States, especially in 2020, challenging the widespread narrative that police presence increases safety. Here, it's clear that perceptions of safety versus danger can be closely impacted by identity and personal experiences. As a result of these different perceptions, safety can be hard to quantify and to generalize. Not all experiences are the same, and a place that is safest for some people may not be safest for all. So we need to keep this in mind as we take a look at some of the current safety and health factors in different areas. But first, let's take a look at how these factors have changed and evolved over time. Timing matters a lot when it comes to safety. Historically, the safest countries to live were likely the ones with access to the best medicine and newest technologies. Access to quality medicine would ensure a longer and healthier life, while technologies related to shelter, food, and other basic needs could provide for the essentials. Other advanced technologies like access to gunpowder or metals to forge weapons could protect communities from invasion and military conflict. However, peace and safety have been suddenly disrupted without warning many times throughout history. For instance, many indigenous tribes in the Americas lived off the land for centuries before colonizers arrived in the late 1400s, bringing disease, forced labor, and migration, and heavily armed military conflict. Though there were in fact conflicts between tribes at times, life in the Americas prior to the presence of the Spanish is largely regarded as a safer period of time for indigenous peoples than after European colonization began. Many determinants of health and safety have fluctuated over time, as global living conditions have changed. For instance, the average lifespan has generally grown with access to medicine and healthcare, and rates of child mortality have declined over time. In pre-modern times, nearly half of all children died before their 5th birthday, while in 2017, child mortality declined to 3.9%. Access to vaccines, antibiotics, and other critical healthcare have significantly improved health outcomes worldwide, which has increased overall safety. Risk and danger have also escalated in recent years, especially with the development of dangerous technologies. The creation of nuclear weapons and other nuclear technologies within the past century presents a catastrophic risk across the globe. Already, some places have and continue to experience the catastrophic impacts of nuclear fallout, such as in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, when the United States bombed Japan in 1945, and in Chernobyl and Fukushima, where nuclear power plant reactor meltdowns took place in 1986 and 2011, respectively. Aside from the initial devastation of these nuclear attacks and accidents, ongoing radiation in these places leads to ongoing risk for the health and safety of those living there. The ongoing threat of nuclear war, as well as the ever-present risk of nuclear disaster, is a relatively new and evolving safety concern that first emerged nearly a century ago. At the same time, growing concerns around climate change have escalated risk in many places around the world since industrial revolutions began. By the end of the 21st century, many places around the world will be uninhabitable, especially the world's hottest places that will get increasingly hotter, coastal regions and islands facing sea level rise, and places that are the most vulnerable to hurricanes and tropical storms. As temperatures become more extreme, droughts and flooding become more common, and extreme weather events become more frequent. The world will undeniably become a less safe place to live. This will especially be seen in places that are the most vulnerable to climate change. Similarly, many outlooks on health and safety have largely shifted since the height of the COVID-19 pandemic and other widespread diseases like HIV, AIDS, and Ebola. The coronavirus pandemic, like other major epidemics, heightened both structural and political successes and failures of healthcare systems and disease management around the world, particularly in cities. COVID-19 was the first pandemic of its size to occur in our world as it's urbanized today. You see, in the 1900s, when the Spanish flu hit, only 14% of people lived in cities worldwide, while today, 57% of people live in cities around the world. Because of this migration to cities have become densely crowded. Without adequate health protections and policies in place, disease can spread quickly and hospitals can be overrun, facing capacity concerns. Many cities were not equipped to properly manage the coronavirus pandemic, as we saw in 2020 and the following years. Others, like Copenhagen, Denmark, Toronto, Canada, Sydney, Australia, and Tokyo, Japan, fared particularly well. So, when thinking about the safest place on Earth, the safety and resilience of major cities has begun to play an increasingly more important role in overall safety of a country. especially as the world has urbanized over the past century. With all these examples, you can see that time largely determines what makes a place safe or not. As our planet contends with major contemporary issues like climate change, the spread of pandemics, and nuclear fallout, the state of safety is always changing in our world. New advancements in healthcare and technology have improved the safety of our world in many ways, while new risks present themselves often. So where is the safest place on Earth now, in 2023 and beyond? Let's break down the current state of the factors we've discussed, starting with health. As we discussed earlier, health plays a major role in how we can think about safety around the world. Factors like accessibility of healthcare and quality of healthcare infrastructure, rates of disease, and life expectancy can tell us about the quality of healthcare systems in different places. Birth rates and child mortality rates can play a role in determining what living conditions are like for pregnant women and newborns. Clearly, health can take many shapes and forms, which all can inform us on where the safest place on Earth really is. At the same time, suicide rates, prevalence of mental illness and care, and happiness ratings can tell us about the emotional health of a given place. All of these ratings and factors play a role in the health and safety of a place. Beyond that, however, let's also consider how different people from different backgrounds experience these conditions for health and safety. Arguably, one of the most important determinants of health and safety of a region is access to quality healthcare. Access to a well-developed public health system is a predictor of longer life expectancy and better health outcomes. Healthcare quality and capacity is crucial, especially in times of widespread health crises, like during the COVID-19 pandemic. In 2021, the Commonwealth Institute examined the healthcare systems in 11 high-income countries, rating efficiency, care process, and the quality of healthcare outcomes. Norway, the Netherlands, and Australia were rated as having the best healthcare by this review. Of the 11 countries, the United States has been ranked as the worst 6 times in the past 20 years. Another study, based on the public perceptions of healthcare system quality, found that Denmark, Germany, and Sweden were viewed as countries with the best developed public health systems in the world. Clearly, many European countries, as well as Australia, rank highly in healthcare access. But how do they hold up in other areas of health and safety? Though healthcare access can show us a lot about how healthy a country may be, healthcare ratings alone cannot show a full picture of health and accessibility in a given place. Access to healthcare is not equal for all people, so even if there are ample hospitals and quality healthcare available, cost and other barriers of healthcare systems can make quality healthcare inaccessible for low-income people especially. At the time, disabled people, older people, pregnant people, and neurodiverse people all have diverse experiences within the workplace, schools, healthcare systems, and in society can impact health and wellness in a given country. The experiences of marginalized peoples, especially those dealing with health conditions, disability, pregnancy, and aging, can greatly vary between countries, regardless of the status of the healthcare infrastructure. However, diverse personal experiences cannot be easily captured by these statistics alone. So, how else can we begin to paint a more complex picture of what health and safety looks like in a given place? Rate of disease is another metric by which countries are often measured in terms of health, though types of diseases and ways of measuring them vary greatly regionally. There are many ways to examine risk of disease in a given country. One World Health Organization study, which looked at the risk of premature death by non-communicable diseases like cancer, diabetes, and heart disease, found that South Korea, Switzerland, Japan, and Australia were all countries with the lowest risk of death from non-communicable diseases. Similarly, Japan, the Koreas, and France were among the countries with the lowest rates of heart disease, which is tied to diet, exercise, and rates of obesity. Of course, as we saw during the recent coronavirus pandemic, risks associated with communicable diseases like the flu, COVID-19, HIV, and AIDS, among others, also play a big role in the safety of a place. During the COVID-19 pandemic, countries like China and New Zealand, as well as smaller countries like Burundi, Vanuatu, and Bhutan, managed the coronavirus with strict policies and had some of the lowest death rates per million people during the pandemic. Death rates specifically around disease can tell us about disease control and healthcare quality, but death rates in general can also give a general sense of health and safety in a given country. Some of the countries with the lowest overall death rates between 2015 and 2020 include Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain. These particularly low death rates are thought to be related to well-run healthcare systems, impressive and improving technologies, and top-level patient care. Infant mortality can also provide a useful measure of health and well-being. When it comes to infant mortality rates, Slovenia, Singapore, Iceland, and Monaco emerge among countries with the lowest rates of infant death. So these countries may be safest for infants given their postnatal health care, relatively low levels of potential risk for infants, and other factors. But thinking beyond death rates about measures of health and safety, one might wonder, where do people live the longest? Life expectancy is a widely used metric when gauging the overall health and safety of a place. Longevity can be a signal of genetics, culture, diet, healthcare, environmental conditions, lifestyle, crime, and more, all of which contribute to making a place safe to live. Among the countries with the longest life expectancies include Monaco, with an average life expectancy of 87.01 years, Japan, with 84.95 years, Switzerland, with 84.38 years, and Singapore, with an average life expectancy of 84.27 years. In Japan, the high life expectancy is largely attributed to diet, since vegetables and fruits, fresh meat and fish, and grains make up most meals, exercise, and the country's investment in public health, with robust vaccination programs and universal health insurance. Switzerland's life expectancy is thought to stem from an active lifestyle, overall satisfaction, and a diet with lots of dairy like cheese and chocolate, as well as the fact that Switzerland spends a higher percentage of its GDP, or gross domestic product, on healthcare than any European Union country. As we can see, lifespan is closely tied to many living conditions that play an instrumental role in health and safety. Both physical health and lifespan, another important factor in health and safety, is mental and emotional wellness. One way to examine mental well-being is to take a look at happiness ratings by country. So, what countries are happiest? According to one 2021 ranking, Finland is the world's happiest country, Denmark is the second happiest country in the world, and Switzerland is third happiest in the world, with Iceland and the Netherlands following close behind. Iceland is also ranked as the country with the highest feeling of social support of the happiest countries, with Finland, Norway, and Denmark tied for second place. On the other hand, taking a look at rates of suicide can also provide a glimpse into emotional wellness and safety of people in a given place, whether tied to living conditions, politics, culture, or other factors. The countries with the lowest reported suicide rates include Antigua and Barbuda, Barbados, and Grenada, as well as countries like Jordan, Syria, Venezuela, Honduras, and the Philippines. Many Scandinavian countries like Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and Finland have high happiness rates and relatively low rates of suicide, but the long winters with days lasting up to 20 hours or more is associated with seasonal affective disorder and higher rates of suicide. However, considering specific statistics like suicide rates may not be the best way to identify health of a country. These rates don't account for circumstances around suicide. For instance, in some countries with liberal laws around physician-assisted suicide, such as Belgium, there might be higher rates of suicide, with many of the deaths related to terminal illness rather than mental health. In other countries, like South Korea, suicides among elders are fairly common as a result of family structures that leave older adults financially dependent on their younger relatives, and suicide is often turned to as an alternative to being a burden on the family. These different conditions surrounding suicide in different places shows us that the circumstances around mental well-being and health cannot totally be captured by statistics alone, whether suicide rates, rates of disease, or funding for healthcare. The factor we need to explore is the effect of environment and climate. But let's first take all of the health factors we've discussed so far and determine which countries are the healthiest. One ranking that incorporates life expectancy, infant mortality rate, health expenditure per capita, and GDP per capita rates Iceland as the healthiest country, given its high levels of health spending, low incidence of preventable diseases, long life expectancy, and state-funded universal healthcare system. Not only that, but Iceland requires residents by law to register with a physician, encouraging preventative care for its people. Other top healthiest countries include Japan, with its particularly long average life expectancy, robust universal health insurance, and high availability of hospital beds, as well as Italy, Singapore, Sweden, and Finland. As you can tell, all those ranked as healthiest in the world are also known for their aptitude in various areas related to health and well-being, including the spread of disease, lifespan, healthcare infrastructure, and happiness ratings, among others that we explored earlier. But as we mentioned, healthcare isn't the total picture. What about environment and climate? A major determinant of health and safety is related to the environment and climate of a given place. The quality of a place's environment and its vulnerability to climate change and other environmental hazards will increasingly determine the health and safety of the people living there as our world experiences more severe impacts of climate change over time. Some of the factors that determine which countries have the best outlooks for environmental safety include resilience and ability to adapt to climate change, risk of natural disasters, food security, accessibility of clean air and water, and exposure to radiation, lead, and other harmful contaminants and chemicals. All of these factors can give us a better picture of which countries are the most environmentally safe places to live, both now and as climate change escalates in the future. As climate change escalates, the hottest places on Earth will grow hotter. The cold places will grow colder, the wettest places will become wetter, and the driest places will become drier. Hurricanes, forest fires, drought, and flooding will all become more frequent. Sea level rise will make many islands and coastal regions uninhabitable, and other extreme weather events will become both more severe and more common. No place on Earth is totally safe from climate change, but some places on Earth will be safer than others. First, places that are cooler are expected to fare better, as by the middle of the 21st century, summer temperatures are expected to be between 5 and 6 degrees hotter than they are now, all across North America. With similar trends worldwide, the safest places will also be away from the ocean, as many coastlines will shrink and become eroded. Islands may find themselves underwater, and tropical storms, flooding, and hurricanes will become more frequent, more intense, and deadlier than they are today. However, access to fresh water is also imperative, as the demand for clean drinking water grows. At the same time, desert terrain and dry places have used up much of the groundwater reserve, and the dry land has become unable to absorb the rain that does fall. Not only that, but elevation will come to play a significant role in safety from flooding and extreme temperatures. All of these factors can keep people safe from climate change, but where on Earth fits the bill? Some top-rated places in terms of geographical safety from climate change include the northern United States, especially around the Great Lakes and Northeast, as well as Greenland, Ireland, and central Canada. Scandinavian countries like Norway, Finland, Sweden, Iceland, and north-central European countries like Estonia and Latvia are also considered to be relatively safe from climate change, barring a collapse of the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, or AMOC. We won't go into detail on this system, but a collapse of this water circulation could cause temperatures in the region to change significantly and relatively quickly, which would have significant impact on the affected country's food output. The timing and likelihood of this is still debated by scientists, so we've included these countries for now. When considering more factors that relate to climate resilience, such as carbon dioxide emissions targets, efforts at shifting to clean energy and adaptability, as well as geography, Norway is rated as the country least vulnerable to climate change. Norway is also followed by New Zealand, then Finland, and other top countries in terms of climate resilience include Denmark, Sweden, Switzerland, Singapore, Austria, Iceland, and Germany. Social systems and governmental policies play a major role in these rankings, as all of these countries are committed to mitigating climate change and transitioning away from harmful fossil fuels. Similarly, one Global Sustainability Institute ranking estimates that in the face of climate catastrophe and global collapse, New Zealand is best poised to persist, as well as Tasmania, Ireland, Iceland, the United Kingdom, and the United States and Canada. These rankings were determined based on metrics of self-sufficiency, the resilience of food systems, finance systems, energy systems, and isolation from other countries that may turn to them in times of catastrophe. You may notice, however, that many of the top-rated countries are wealthy European countries that have the financial capacity to adapt to climate change. While some of these countries have demonstrated a commitment to acting to mitigate climate change, stopping climate change from becoming catastrophic depends on global action. So despite commitments by some of these countries to go carbon neutral, or to shift to clean energy, these places may still be at high risk of climate effects if countries worldwide do not shift away from fossil fuels. As a result, commitment to mitigating climate change may not be the best indication of safety in the face of climate change. Regardless, low-income countries are disproportionately at risk from climate impacts, since they often don't have the means to fund adaptation-related measures in the face of climate catastrophe. Another major environmental safety concern is the threat of natural disaster. The vulnerability of a given place is tied to the socio-economic state of a country, the infrastructure in place to prevent disaster, and the environmental factors that predispose or protect the place in times of disaster. A place's ability to adapt to recurring natural disasters, as well as to cope and rebuild after times of disaster, is also highly important. According to one 2020 review, Qatar was ranked as the country with the lowest disaster risk, with countries like Malta, Saudi Arabia, Iceland, Egypt, and Finland all ranking in the top 10 safest countries from natural disasters as well. Adaptability and vulnerability in the face of natural disasters is increasingly important for safety, as climate change continues to escalate. Food scarcity is another major factor in terms of resilience to climate change and disaster, as well as overall environmental health and safety of a place. Food security and the ability to produce food locally can make a country safer in times of disaster, such as during the coronavirus pandemic, when soaring demand caused shortages of essential foods. Affordability, the availability of food and natural resources, and the safety and quality of food are all considered in one ranking of food security, which found that Finland was the most food-secure country as of 2020. Other highly rated countries include Ireland, the Netherlands, Austria, the United Kingdom, Sweden, Japan, Switzerland, the United States, and Canada. These countries are therefore safer in instances when food supply is short, and can be safer places for those at risk of food insecurity. Beyond times of disaster and famine, slower, less sudden, and intense forms of environmental harm can also pose serious risk to health and safety, such as access to clean air and clean water. Pollution and climate change go hand in hand, impacting the health and safety of billions of people worldwide. For instance, in early June of 2023, over 120 million people across the United States were warned to stay inside due to unhealthy air quality. The skies around New York City turned a grim orange as Canadian wildfires covered the northeastern United States in smoke and ash. Wildfire smoke, as well as fossil fuel emissions, trash incineration, and other forms of air pollution can all greatly impact air quality, posing serious health risks for those with respiratory diseases like asthma, as well as for pregnant people, aging adults, children, and at times, everyone. Countries and territories with the cleanest air include Guam, French Polynesia, and other islands in the tropics, as well as Iceland, Australia, New Zealand, Finland, Sweden, and Norway. Meanwhile, access to clean drinking water is another necessity, as contaminated waterways can contribute to spread of disease, birth defects, and reproductive concerns, or other long-term health problems. Countries with the cleanest water include Austria, Finland, Greece, Iceland, and Ireland, as well as the Netherlands, Norway, and Switzerland. Another major consideration for environmental safety is the rate of exposure to deadly chemicals and contaminants, such as lead, forever chemicals, radiation, and more. These contaminants can greatly impact people's health, especially immunocompromised, pregnant, older, young, and disabled people. In one rating of the least toxic countries in the world, Kenya was rated at the top, followed by Tanzania, Ethiopia, Mozambique, and Cameroon. Many developed, wealthier countries have higher levels of toxicity as a result of pollution and chemicals resulting from rapid development. 8 of the most toxic countries, on the other hand, are located in the Middle East, where oil extraction is prominent and development is accelerating. Through all of this, we can see that the environment around us plays a major role in terms of our safety. As climate change and environmental degradation persist and accelerate, environmental safety will grow increasingly crucial and will impact many lives worldwide. However, it's important to note that many of these environmental rankings are based on projections, outlooks, and notions of what environmental health looks like. While the future of climate change may in some ways be unpredictable, For instance, though, the northern US is labeled as relatively safe from climate change. The impacts of the Canadian wildfires were surprising and unexpected in a place that was thought to be less impacted by climate change. Nevertheless, the environment and our climate plays a significant role in determining the health and safety of a given place. Next, we'll examine the safest countries when it comes to violence and harm. But who are the top contenders for high environmental safety? Some of the safest countries in terms of environmental conditions include Finland, which was rated highly in terms of resilience to climate change and natural disasters, clean air and water, and food security. Iceland, which received similarly high ratings on climate resilience, adaptability to climate catastrophe and breakdown, resilience in face of natural disasters, and clean water and air, as well as Canada, Norway, Sweden, and Switzerland. But how do these countries and others shape up when evaluated for safety from violence and harm? Determining safety also requires a look into rates of violence and harm in a given place. Though violence is often thought about as one of the most obvious forms of safety or unsafety in a place, there are a number of factors that determine whether violence is a serious risk in a given place. First, the Global Peace Index provides useful insights into how safe a place is, as do rates of military conflict, rates of violent crime, and levels of policing presence and violence. However, some risks to safety are less obvious, such as strength of gun laws, risk of nuclear war, rates of political oppression, and traffic and pedestrian fatalities. So, which countries have the least violence, whether in terms of war, crime, or political oppression? The Global Peace Index ratings are focused on 3 domains of peacefulness, which include levels of societal safety and security, the extent of ongoing domestic and international conflict in a given country, and the degree of militarization in that country. The societal safety and security category is measured through rates of violent crime, terrorist activity, and violent demonstrations, as well as relationships with neighboring countries, stability of the political scene, and the number of displaced people and refugees from within that country. Ongoing domestic and international conflict is measured through indicators of involvement in external and internal conflicts, as well as their role and the duration of involvement in said conflicts. Finally, the indicators of degree of militarization include levels of military buildup, access to weapons, level of peacefulness, military expenditures as a percentage of GDP, number of armed service officers, and financial contributions to the United Nations peacekeeping mission. So, which countries are the most peaceful according to this rating system? Let's look and see. Coming in the top spot as the most peaceful country in the world is Iceland, which is followed by Denmark, Ireland, New Zealand, Austria, and Singapore. Other largely peaceful countries include Portugal, Slovenia, Japan, Switzerland, and Canada. Clearly, the Global Peace Index can show us a lot about peace and violence in a given country. But military conflict and violent crime are not the only forms of violence that we should consider. Even with the value that is provided by the Global Peace Index, however, there may be some shortcomings in this evaluation of peace. Considering militarization, for instance, and access to weapons and quantity of armed service officers can cause many large, wealthy developed countries to appear unsafe because of military presence. However, militarization may also be seen as a form of safety and security, as an established and strong military presence could deter conflicts from other countries. As a result, the index may not entirely represent how peaceful or violent a country is. And it's important to understand safety in the broader context of a country's political and social situation. Beyond militarization and participation in military conflict, nuclear warfare has emerged and escalated as a major threat to safety in the past century. Many major cities worldwide, especially in the United States and other wealthy developed countries with access to nuclear weapons, like Russia, France, China, the United Kingdom, Pakistan, India, Israel, and North Korea, are at risk of large-scale nuclear attacks. Countries involved in military conflicts globally are also at heightened risk of attack, with the scale of nuclear impacts both immediate and long after, as seen in the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki by the United States government. The prevalence of nuclear weaponry, which is estimated to be 13,000 weapons, suggests that the entire planet is at risk. So where is the safest place to be in case of nuclear attacks? Switzerland, for one, has space for 100% of their population to be protected inside blast shelters. Australia and New Zealand, according to scientists, are geographically best suited to survive a nuclear apocalypse, as well as Iceland, the Solomon Islands, and Vanuatu. However, military alliances and involvement are always changing, so predicting safety in the event of nuclear fallout is difficult to do. So we've seen how militarization and external threats of war can play a major role in safety. But what about the domestic side of violence in a country? How does policing protect or harm people in countries around the world? Police are often thought to keep us safe. However, the presence of police may not be the best indicator of safety in a given country, as the use of deadly force poses a serious risk to many people worldwide, especially when paired with relaxed gun laws. Iceland, Denmark, and Switzerland are ranked as having the fewest police killings worldwide, reporting no police killings annually. Iceland has had only one police killing in its history, and police in Iceland do not carry firearms. Other countries that are the safest from police violence include Portugal, Sweden, Norway, Finland, and New Zealand, among others. At the time, many of the countries with the least police killings are rated as among the overall top safest countries in the world. While the police and military can pose a serious risk for the safety of a country, death and injury related to violence often stems from political circumstances of a given country. For instance, countries with limited freedom of the press, or with known persecution and criminalization of certain people, whether based on race, religion, sexuality, gender, ethnicity, or some other aspect of identity, can pose a serious risk to citizens and visitors. So which countries are safest for self-expression and for women, LGBTQ+ people, and others from marginalized backgrounds? When it comes to self-expression, safety can be largely supported or inhibited by cultural and political circumstances. And so, places with the greatest protections and cultural support for self-expression tend to be safer from diverse backgrounds. To this point, Norway is ranked as having the greatest freedom of press, followed by Denmark, Sweden, Estonia, and Finland. Further, the Netherlands, Canada, the United Kingdom, Australia, Norway, and Sweden are all rated as having strong laws around religious freedom, which protects another form of self-expression. At the same time, Norway is regarded as one of the world's most gender-equal countries, with considerable efforts to expand women's rights and to support self-determination and the expansion of opportunities for women and girls. Finland also has a long history of gender equality, granting women full political rights in 1906, the first country to do so. Men and women are equally represented in the workforce in Finland as well. Iceland also is among the top countries for gender equality, and in Iceland, there is a law that no public corporation board, government council, or committee may have less than 40% gender equality. Denmark, Luxembourg, Switzerland, and Sweden also have reputations for gender equity. At the same time, Canada is ranked as the most LGBTQ-friendly country in the world, followed by Sweden and the Netherlands, on account of their legislative track records for LGBTQ+ rights and same-sex marriage. The Netherlands is known for being the best country in terms of racial equity, followed by Sweden, Norway, Canada, and Finland, according to public perception. All of these factors contribute greatly to the safety of a place and the people from all walks of life that are living there. Another important factor for safety is tied to rates of traffic and pedestrian fatalities, which can demonstrate a form of harm that is not always intentional but holds severe implications for safety. The safest places to drive worldwide include San Marino, with no reported deaths per 100,000 inhabitants, Micronesia, the Maldives, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and Switzerland, among others. Road safety is essential in determining the safest places on Earth, since drivers, bikers, and pedestrians alike all are at risk from dangerous road and driving conditions. So what countries are the safest from violence? Norway, Finland, Switzerland, Sweden, and Denmark all emerge as relatively safe from violence, especially in their ratings for freedom of expression, suggesting they may be particularly safe for people from marginalized backgrounds. So considering everything we've discussed, where is the safest place on Earth? It can be hard to definitely say that any country is the safest, given how subjective perception-based rankings can be, and how limited some statistical-based analyses can be. It's important to remember that not every place will be equally safe for all people, and that people come from different backgrounds and experiences. However, by using many lines of reasoning and evaluating safety from a number of different perspectives, we have narrowed it down to one country that's safer than the rest. When all is said and done, Iceland is the safest country in the world, especially given its ratings as the healthiest and most peaceful country in the world. Not only that, but Iceland does not have any kind of harmful or dangerous animals, including mosquitoes, ticks, bears, snakes, or poisonous spiders. It highly supports the equity of all people, has a very low crime rate, has very clean air and water, has no army, and its police do not carry guns. It also has high resilience to climate change, natural disasters, and nuclear war. Other top contenders include Switzerland, Denmark, New Zealand, Norway, Sweden, and Finland. But in the end, Iceland takes the top spot. How does your country stack up in the rankings of safety? Where do you feel safest? Let us know in the comments. Now watch why hot countries are poorer than cold countries, or what's the most difficult place to get to in the world.